Every time I ate a monster, I got stronger. The first one was the Minotaur that had me bleeding out beneath a broken dungeon floor. One bite put me back on my feet, and the next gave me its roar. In the kingdom of Westmark, humans were forbidden to eat monsters because the meat caused sickness, death, or monsterization. I was Declan Hurst, a level 7 E-rank adventurer from Dunhaven, and abnormal status nullification erased conditions from my body. So when the Minotaur meat tried to transform me, my skill erased the damage and left the strength. That was how I turned dinner into combat skills. The question was why I was alone with a Minotaur while my party ran away with my backpack. To answer that, go back 10 hours to the 6th floor of the Blight Labyrinth. I was still fighting rats for rent money. An old noble's diary described the taboo. Monster meat brought power, then fever, madness, death, or monsterization. Every guild treated it as a warning, and so did I. Blight leaked poison through its first 6 floors. Nullification erased the miasma, so I harvested blightgrass while stronger parties chased cleaner money. That job earned me Blight Scavenger. That morning, I found a thick patch and cut only enough for food and rent. Then miasma rats swarmed me. Poison couldn't stop me, but teeth still worked, and one rat had opened my calf when a blast tore through the pack from behind. 3 adventurers stepped from the fog, laughing about saving me after nearly taking my head. While I thanked them, one walked into my private harvest room and started cutting. They had followed me to steal the spot. Their frontman asked whether the Blight Scavenger planned to complain, and I swallowed it because the guild would hear 3 better-equipped men before me. At the Bottomless Bowl Tavern that night, adventurers mocked a grown man who struggled against rats. Nullification let me survive poison, but gave no strength, speed, or attack. To every party, I was an E-rank body built for carrying bags through bad air. You ever notice how brave people get when the target eats alone? The next morning, the Dunhaven Guild announced a new labyrinth in the Cedar Ridge Mountains. Serious parties rushed toward untouched treasure. Blightgrass prices crashed, and my week's harvest barely paid for breakfast, so I asked for Cedar Ridge access. The receptionist checked my E-rank card and refused because the new labyrinth required D rank. That was when Gareth Crowley, leader of the respected Crimson Edge Party, offered to register me as their porter. His kindness felt rehearsed, but the pay covered rent and his rank opened the gate. Would you turn down a month's rent over one careful smile? Rent had already made that decision for me. During the carriage ride, Gareth introduced Brock Danner, his frontline fighter, and the party's speed support. Both resented the Blight Scavenger. Brock inspected my guild card, laughed at level 7, and announced that my fire magic was barely strong enough to light a cookfire. Gareth only reminded them that somebody had to carry supplies. The Cedar Ridge Labyrinth entrance was packed, so I suggested mapping the first layer before going deeper. Gareth dismissed me. Brock called that porter thinking, and Crimson Edge pushed down to the 4th floor for better loot. Their rank looked real once fighting started. Gareth controlled the center, the support's haste kept them moving, and Brock smashed beasts before they reached the formation. I missed my first strike and nearly took a claw through the chest before Brock saved me, then made sure everyone heard about it. Afterward, Brock ordered me to harvest the mangled corpses. I used weak fire magic to burn blood from one piece, and the support laughed that the porter was cooking dungeon meat. Then she repeated the taboo: eating it could kill or transform a human. A roar ended the joke. The Minotaur came through the next arch carrying an axe wider than my chest. Appraisal gear marked it B rank, far above anything expected on the 4th floor. Gareth's sword barely cut it, Brock's shield arm folded under one hit, and the support's haste only kept them alive long enough to reach the stairs. I was still carrying the supply backpack when Gareth shouted for it. I turned, and his sword went through my back. Brock activated Warrior's Engagement and marked me as the Minotaur's target. The support threw haste over Crimson Edge, and all 3 ran with my backpack. Gareth finally dropped the gentle voice and admitted their regular porter had never been sick. They needed disposable bait, and the weak scavenger nobody wanted had been perfect. That was when Gareth earned the only label I ever gave him: Captain Backstab. The Minotaur charged me exactly as Brock's skill demanded. Its horn caught my side and drove me through the floor, sealing both of us beneath the 4th level. I landed with broken ribs, Gareth's wound pouring through my coat, and the injured monster trapped under fallen rock. My supplies were gone, the route had closed, and neither of us could reach the other without crawling. That ugly standoff dragged me back to the S-rank hero from my childhood. Monsters had burned my village, and one man stayed in the smoke until every survivor escaped. He carried me out, went back for the next child, and told me never to give up while somebody still needed me alive. I became an adventurer because I wanted to be that person. I planted both hands on the stone and crawled toward the Minotaur. I cut a strip from its wounded shoulder and bit down. The meat was hot, raw, and foul. Then fever hit, black veins climbed my hand, and monsterization tried to take my body. Abnormal Status Nullification activated. The fever vanished, and the strength stayed. My bleeding slowed enough for me to stand, and a new pressure filled my chest. Skill acquired, roar. I opened my mouth. Boom! The trapped Minotaur went rigid. Physical boost flooded my arms and legs, so I lifted its axe and ended the creature before the rock shifted. Would you have left a B-rank boss axe buried down there? Neither did I. A crack above us opened under the sound, and bat monsters poured into the chamber. I killed the first one, ate a meaningful piece, and gained echolocation. Suddenly, every heartbeat and hollow pocket in the stone had a shape. The room stopped being a grave and became a map. Then I hunted my way out. An armor spider gave me thread manipulation and steel body. A thunderwolf gave me lightning cloak, and a winged monster left me aerial slash. A blood-feeding creature gave me bloodlust, which slowed the bleeding without pretending my injuries had disappeared. Every meal solved the next obstacle, and each bite made the Minotaur's axe feel lighter in my hands. Thread manipulation pulled me through a gap too high to climb. Steel body kept falling rock from crushing my ribs, and lightning cloak dropped a pack that cornered me in a narrow turn. When another beast blocked the upper stair, aerial slash reached it before the axe could. Each skill arrived during a fight, usually with the owner trying to eat me first. The deeper I climbed, the more the axe stopped feeling borrowed. Monsters heard the roar, saw their boss's weapon in my hands, and hesitated before attacking. I spent every second of that hesitation. Bloodlust kept me moving, but Gareth's stab reopened whenever I swung too hard. I wrapped the wound with cloth stolen from a dead monster's nest and kept going because Crimson Edge still had my supplies, my pay, and several hours to turn murder into a heroic report. By the upper floors, monsters that once forced me to hide were running from the smiling porter carrying a boss weapon. I had entered Cedar Ridge as luggage. I walked out carrying dinner, an axe, and several reasons to find Gareth before the guild buried my name. At the Dunhaven Guild, Crimson Edge was already reporting my death. Gareth told the receptionist that the Minotaur had killed me while I bravely protected the party. His speed support, Sadie Kerr, kept her eyes down. Brock supplied enough heroic detail to make himself sound heartbroken, and the receptionist who had processed my blight grass for years was trying not to cry. Gareth had expected a body nobody would recover. The axe, the coat, and my voice proved that calculation wrong before truth ever arrived. Then the doors opened, and I walked in wearing the same bloody coat Gareth had left under the 4th floor. The receptionist recognized me first. Brock stopped in the middle of describing my final scream, and Sadie stared at the Minotaur's axe in my hand. My stolen backpack sat beside Gareth's chair, still stuffed with the healing bottles he had decided were worth more than my life. His face emptied because the dead porter had arrived before his lie could become paperwork. Before anyone spoke, adventurers stepped away from Crimson Edge. The receptionist came around the counter, and Brock shifted my backpack behind his leg. He had spent the morning playing grieving survivor. Now he looked like a thief caught holding the corpse's property. Captain Backstab crossed the room and wrapped me in fake brotherly relief. He praised every god he could remember, then whispered that I should keep quiet if I wanted to survive the night. I told him the night was his problem. Gareth ordered Sadie and Brock to take me outside for treatment. They grabbed my arms and shoulders. They couldn't move me. Brock strained until his boots scraped. Sadie added, "Haste," and my feet stayed exactly where they were. Somebody near the request board laughed, which made Gareth's smile die faster than any accusation could have. "Be honest, you would have given Brock another 5 seconds too." I pulled free and told the whole guild what happened. Gareth took my backpack and stabbed me. Brock used Warrior's Engagement to make the Minotaur chase me. Sadie accelerated their escape while I bled on the floor. Gareth denied everything. Sadie called it confusion during battle, and Brock threatened to break my jaw for insulting Crimson Edge. I pointed at the backpack, then at the matching sword hole through my coat. Gareth still put his rank and reputation behind the lie because he believed an E-rank porter could never challenge him in his own guild. The receptionist asked why a Minotaur had supposedly left a narrow blade wound. Gareth snapped at her to stay out of adventurer business, and that was the moment her grief turned into anger. She had mourned me while the men who stabbed me stood at her counter collecting sympathy. Guildmaster Calvin Dorsey had been watching from the counter. He made Gareth repeat the denial, and only then did a truth officer step forward. Calvin had noticed a pattern of temporary porters dying around Crimson Edge, but Gareth had just given him the first survivor willing to accuse them in public. The officer asked whether Crimson Edge had intentionally used me as bait. Gareth answered no, and truth marked it false. That confirmation was enough. Calvin named the consequences already falling on Crimson Edge: loss of rank, labyrinth profits, property, freedom, and possible forced labor for the porter deaths. Sadie dropped into a chair. Brock looked toward the doors. Gareth watched the whole guild move away from him and chose the one move that could make his day worse. He attacked the truth officer. I caught his sword before it reached her. Gareth stared at my hand around the blade, then at the Minotaur axe on my back. I warned him once to stop. He swung again, so I punched Captain Backstab through the guild wall. One shot. He landed in the street under broken stone while the people who had mocked my rat problem crowded the hole to see whether he could still speak. The receptionist started laughing because grief had turned into relief too quickly for anything polite. Brock took one step toward the wall, saw me lower my fist, and sat back down without being asked. Sadie handed my coin pouch to the receptionist before anyone searched her. Gareth had spent years making those two feel protected by his rank, and one trip through the wall ended the arrangement faster than a speech ever could. Crimson Edge was taken into custody after I broke its leader and its lie. The guild seized its immediate profits and awarded me 20,000 gold crowns from the forfeited money. The pouch was heavier than anything I had earned in years of breathing poison. It could buy real equipment, months of food, and enough rent to stop treating stale bread as a personality trait. I counted every seal, because maturity has limits, and mine ended somewhere near Captain Backstab's hole in the wall. The next morning, I bought a magic bag and returned to Blightmas to measure the Minotaur meal against the rats that used to beat me. A 6th-floor miasma rat was waiting in the fog to help. The next morning, I returned to the Blightmas labyrinth with a magic bag, a full stomach, and the most irresponsible shopping list in Dunhaven. Other adventurers used magic bags for weapons and treasure. I filled mine with cookware first, because monster skills were useful and raw dungeon meat was still raw dungeon meat. You could judge my priorities after you've tried raw lizard. Cookware was survival equipment with a handle. I went back to the 6th floor for one reason. The same miasma rats that had nearly killed me could measure what the Minotaur meal had changed. One rat lunged from the fog. I hit it once, and the body crossed the corridor before I fully extended my arm. Yesterday's boss monster had become today's ingredient. Appraisal appeared among the skills I had gained during my escape, so I used it on myself. My level had jumped from 7 to 42. My strength, speed, and endurance had climbed so far that my old guild card looked like it belonged to somebody's sickly cousin. The result hit harder than the rat. Level 42. What would you test next after waking up 35 levels stronger? I picked the floors that used to keep me out. Growth normally slowed hard after level 40. Mine had sprinted past that wall in one night, and now the only useful question was how far it could keep going. A stone door that once needed bolt shoulders moved with one hand, and a ledge I had climbed by rope disappeared under one jump. My body had advanced overnight. My judgment and sword training still belonged to the man who lost arguments with rats, so I went deeper to test that gap myself. The broken route to the Minotaur chamber had already sealed as the labyrinth repaired itself. Good. I had no interest in revisiting the place where Captain Backstab left me unless the floor started paying rent. By the 24th floor, the fog was thick enough to hide a blade at arm's length. Echolocation gave every moving shape a clean outline, and appraisal told me what mattered without turning the fight into homework. A lizard soldier spotted me first. I cut its shoulder, and it fled down a narrow passage. The creature moved badly enough to look wounded, but its tail stayed too steady. I followed to see where it was going. The steady tail had already exposed the performance. The passage ended at a stone wall. Then Lizard stepped out behind me in formation. The wounded soldier had been bait. A level 32 General Lizard stood beyond the line, chirping high commands that moved every shield and spear together. Individually, I could overpower any of them. As a unit, they closed every gap before I reached it. The general kept itself behind the formation and ordered the others with the confidence of a creature that had killed stronger intruders through discipline. I used physical boost and punched through the first shield line, then launched an aerial slash at the general. The strike crossed its chest. No wound appeared. A smaller lizard beside it folded around the exact injury instead. That was the clue, and the general carried Substitute, a skill that transferred damage or conditions to a chosen target. It had turned one subordinate into living armor, so I stopped attacking the commander and killed the damage bearer first. The general screamed a new order. Its soldiers tightened around me, but the formation had already lost the rule that made it safe. The damage bearer's death broke the formation. 2 soldiers looked at the corpse instead of me, and that tiny lapse gave me the opening raw strength had missed. The general tried to restore control through command, but panic was already moving faster than its voice. Its whole strategy had been simple: somebody else always took the wound. I fired thread manipulation into the ceiling and pulled myself above their spears. The threads spread between the walls, dropped like a net, and wrapped the whole unit. The soldiers cut at the cords while I swung over their heads and landed behind the general. Its last command never left its throat. One clean swing took the head. The surviving lizards broke formation and ran. Their confidence had belonged to the system around them. And once I removed the center, all that military discipline became a hallway full of reptiles choosing unemployment. I had solved the fight, gained Substitute, and acquired command from the general. Then I opened the magic bag, took out a pan, and cooked the meat properly. The first bite of seasoned lizard was embarrassingly good. Eating a meaningful piece exposed me to the monster's native skills, though only the ones my body could power became active. The taboo had started as a desperate survival move. Now it came with dinner reviews. Over the next floors, I hunted long enough to test combinations and fill the holes in my new build. Lightning Cloak dropped a charging monster. Frog and insect dishes tasted suspiciously like fried chicken, which raised questions about Dunhaven taverns that I chose not to investigate. The meals gave me venom, temperature variation, poison scale powder, paralysis scale powder, stealth, paralyzing breath, and thermal search. Every enemy could become food, and every meal could become the answer to a later problem. Then a human scream cut through the corridor before I finished packing the pan. I ran toward it and found 4 adventurer hunters surrounding a wounded elf woman. They had torn away her hood, cut one arm, and were discussing how much a buyer would pay for an elf with high-rank training. Their leader, Cyrus Dre, was level 65. Concealment gear blocked most of his group's detailed status, and underworld information brokers had sold them the one fact they needed. The woman carried a weakness that made her valuable and vulnerable. She was on one knee, bleeding, and still looked dangerous. Silver hair framed a face that had no business appearing on the worst floor at my week, and her green eyes stayed fixed on the hunters instead of me. In my defense, even half dead, she was winning the room. The elf warned me to run. The elf knew Cyrus's level and refused to watch another stranger die for her, even though I was a complete stranger. Cyrus studied my cheap clothes, recognized the Blight Scavenger nickname from guild gossip, and decided I was either stupid or lost. He ordered the nearest hunter to kill me without interrupting the price discussion. The first man came forward with his tongue hanging out and asked whether I wanted a quick death. I told him he had already used too many words for someone that week. He swung, and I spat venom straight across his face. The poison ate through skin before he understood what had landed. He dropped screaming, Cyrus's casual expression vanished, and the wounded elf looked at me again because an E-rank rumor had just melted one of her captors. The remaining hunters attacked together. Steel Body absorbed a blade that should have opened my ribs, Lightning Cloak punished anyone who held contact, and Thread Manipulation dragged one man's ankle out from under him. Cyrus was faster than his level suggested, and his people knew how to fight humans. He waited until I turned, drove a kick into my chest, and launched me through the reeds into a black swamp. The water was thick with poison and concentrated miasma. Cyrus knew the area well. He told his men to wait because no adventurer could stay submerged there longer than a minute without losing strength, and he wanted me weak enough to question before I died. Cyrus had felt the balance change, but retreating from the Blight Scavenger in front of his crew would destroy the authority holding them together, so I stayed under. My ribs hurt from the kick, but nullification erased the poison and miasma as soon as they entered my body. Outside, Cyrus and his hunters breathed the fumes while waiting for me to panic. Their hands started shaking, their breathing shortened, and one man begged to leave. Cyrus forced them to stay because his pride was already trapped in the swamp with me. He had picked the only battlefield in the labyrinth where my old useless skill became the perfect advantage. After the miasma had done enough work, I stood up and walked out of the swamp. Cyrus stepped backward. One hunter dropped his weapon because his fingers had stopped obeying him, and the elf's eyes widened as I walked out of a swamp meant to kill me. I told Cyrus the unique skill he had mocked was Abnormal Status Nullification. Steel Body took his first desperate strike, Lightning Cloak broke his guard, and Aerial Slash dropped the 2 remaining hunters before they reached the trees. The hunters had spent years choosing victims who couldn't answer back. Now their leader was coughing in the poison he had picked for me, and the wounded elf watched his crew stop obeying. One subordinate tried to crawl away. The swamp took his strength before he reached dry ground. Cyrus demanded to know why I had monster skills. I refused to explain, and he activated agility enhancement and rushed me with the speed he had saved for an emergency. I answered with physical boost. He expected the level gap to settle the exchange. Instead, I caught his wrist, drove him into the ground, and ended the fight with his own men too poisoned to help. A level 65 trafficker had walked into his private killing swamp and discovered the local scavenger owned the deed. He was cooked. I cut the elf free and gave her water. She thanked me with careful dignity because she was still hiding how close she was to collapse. Then a giant moth burst from the canopy and sprayed paralyzing scales across the clearing. I damaged one wing with Aerial Slash, but the powder flooded toward us. The elf raised her uninjured hand and called a wind current so precise that every scale curved around our bodies and blew back into the moth. That was my first look at her real level of skill. She could barely stand, yet she still read my attack and built her own around it. We struck together, my blade opening the body while her wind tore the creature down. The moth hit the ground. She hit it a second later. I carried her away from the poisonous clearing to a massive pale tree whose roots pushed clean water through the surrounding soil. By sunset, the wounded elf had regained enough strength to speak. She introduced herself as Selena Archer, the Emerald Gale. 5 years earlier, she had belonged to Stormcrest, an S-rank party known across Westmark. Their expedition into the Abyssal Labyrinth killed the leader, forced one member into retirement, left at least one companion missing, and sent Selena home with something worse than an ordinary wound. She kept the history short because every name still hurt. She opened the torn edge of her clothing just enough to reveal a black mark spreading across her upper chest. I noticed the skin because I had eyes. Then appraisal showed the condition, and every playful thought left the room. Level down curse. The curse had been draining her level for 5 years. The hunters had exploited that weakness, and if her level reached 0, she would die. Selena was a former S-rank legend who had just helped me kill a monster while barely holding level 43. She expected sympathy, maybe fear. Instead, I was staring at the substitute skill I had taken from the General Lizard. Substitute could move a condition from one person to another, and nullification could erase anything that reached me. The combination had saved nobody yet, and a 5-year curse was a terrible first test. Selena saw the idea on my face and told me not to do anything reckless. I held out my hand anyway. Under the pale tree, I told Selena exactly how substitute worked before I touched her. She had to accept the transfer, and I had to keep contact while the condition moved. If the curse reached me, nullification should erase it. If my guess was wrong, I would inherit the same death clock that had been eating her alive. Selena's fear had nothing to do with trusting me. She trusted me enough to be terrified that I would kill myself for someone I had met an hour earlier. She grabbed my wrist and told me to stop. I asked whether she wanted to live long enough to find her missing companions. Her grip tightened, and then she gave one sharp nod and placed my hand over the curse mark. The transfer began. Cold pain crawled up my fingers, through my arm and into my chest. The mark on Selena faded one line at a time while black veins spread across my skin. 10 seconds had never taken that long. Selena tried to pull away when my breathing stopped. I held on because breaking contact would leave the curse divided between us, and neither of us knew what that would do. The final strand entered my body. Abnormal Status Nullification activated. The black veins disappeared. Selena stared at the clean skin over her chest, then ripped out her guild card with shaking hands. Her condition read, normal, and her level had stopped falling. For 5 years, every fight had cost Selena part of her life. Now the death clock was gone, and she kept staring at the clean card until the tremor left her hands. She called me an idiot. Selena's voice cracked on the word, and then she pulled me into a hard embrace before I could make the obvious joke. I felt her shoulders shake once. There was nothing funny, so I kept my mouth shut and held her until she let go. That evening, we went to the bottomless bowl because the tavern manager could clean her remaining wounds and because Selena wanted real food after surviving on field rations. The manager recognized the Emerald Gale immediately, nearly dropped the healing cloth, and wisely decided to ask questions after he closed the cut. Over dinner, Selena demanded to know why I kept risking myself for strangers, so I told her the part of my life I usually kept buried. Monsters had destroyed my village when I was a child. I remembered smoke, broken homes, and adults dying while trying to buy children a few more seconds. Then an unnamed S-rank adventurer arrived, pulled me from the ruins, and stayed in the street until the last survivor escaped. He told me never to give up while someone still needed me alive. That was why I became an adventurer. I wanted to reach S-rank and become the person who stayed when everyone else ran. Selena understood because Stormcrest had left the same wound in her from the opposite direction. She had survived the Abyssal Labyrinth while people she loved remained inside, and she intended to regain her strength and go back for them. Then she offered to form a party with me. Selena wanted a partner whose skills might survive the Abyssal Labyrinth, and I needed someone experienced enough to stop every new ability from becoming a terrible experiment. The way she held my gaze added a reason neither of us admitted. I asked whether curing one curse had damaged her judgment. Selena told me bravery was attractive, even when attached to a man who carried frying pans into dungeons. I called her terrifying, and she smiled and accepted both descriptions as compliments. Before I could answer properly, 3 tavern regulars noticed Selena sitting with the Blight Scavenger. They had mocked me for years, and envy hit them harder than the ale. One grabbed Selena's shoulder and asked why an elf like her was wasting time with me. I stood, and Selena stood faster. The room expected a fight. Instead, Selena challenged the men to a drinking contest and announced she would compete herself. The manager tried to remind her that he had finished healing her less than 10 minutes earlier. Selena treated that as an irrelevant detail. The first bully laughed because he saw a slim elf and assumed easy victory. Meanwhile, Selena had spent years drinking with S-rank adventurers who considered sobriety a temporary status condition. She emptied the first mug, then the second, and by the time the third man folded over the table, half the tavern was chanting her name, and the other half was reconsidering every joke they had made about my company. The last bully tried to slow the pace by arguing about cup size. Selena took his larger mug, finished it anyway, and slid the empty cup back without spilling a drop. The manager stopped pretending he disapproved and started taking bets from the tables farthest from the healing supplies. Selena won, lifted one finger in triumph, and passed out face first beside the empty cups. I used Substitute to pull the drunkenness into myself. Nullification erased it instantly, and Selena woke up, looked at the table, and ordered another drink. You give a newly cured elf one free evening, and she turns recovery into competitive drinking. I told her the cure had clearly failed somewhere important. She told me freedom included bad decisions. The manager took the mug away before her new philosophy became his cleanup problem. That was when he offered us a request. The tavern's signature fish came from Silverfin Reach, but snapfins had swarmed the fishing grounds and cut off the supply. He needed the monsters cleared before customers started rioting over the menu. Selena accepted before I could ask about the reward. She pointed at the empty plate and said the reward was obvious. The next morning, we took a small boat onto Silverfin Reach. Selena held the rope while I watched the water through echolocation. Level 23 snapfins circled beneath us in a widening ring, then rushed the hull together. I dove before they could overturn us and activated Lightning Cloak. Electricity spread through the water, stunning the first wave and killing most of the swarm. Selena hauled bodies toward the boat while I cut the survivors. One snapfin bit through my sleeve. I killed it, took a quick bite before packing the rest, and gained high-speed swimming. The skill felt like a current forming inside my legs, but I had no reason to celebrate yet because something deeper was wrong. The remaining snapfins had stopped attacking. They floated below us facing the same dark trench, guarding it instead of fleeing. I tied the rope around my waist and told Selena to pull twice if she saw the line go slack. She objected because the smart decision was returning with the fish we already had. I reminded her that monsters guarding an empty trench usually meant the trench was not empty. Selena called that the kind of reasoning that got brave men killed. I told her she had called bravery attractive the night before. She regretted giving me material immediately. I descended along the rope until the light vanished. At the bottom, a level 38 creature called Broodclaw lay against the rock, surrounded by eggs and newly formed snapfins. The passive body was bait. It produced the smaller monsters, let them exhaust prey, then attacked anyone curious enough to approach. Broodclaw's tentacles snapped around my arms and legs. I triggered Lightning Cloak, but Broodclaw cut off its own electrified feelers with autotomy before the current reached its body. Fresh limbs started growing from the wounds. The snapfins swarmed behind me. My air was running out, and every second I fought made the rope tangle tighter. Raw strength couldn't solve water, regeneration, and a body designed to replace anything I damaged. I pulled the retreat signal. Selena braced against the boat and hauled me upward while the creatures chased. She hit the surface current with great wind, buying enough space to drag me aboard. I coughed up water, and she called me several versions of reckless that sounded much less affectionate than the tavern version. The first attempt had failed. Broodclaw regenerated, controlled the swarm, and owned the water, but I now had high-speed swimming, and the retreat had shown me where its core body stayed when the tentacles detached. More importantly, Selena had asked me to become her partner without knowing the ugliest part of my power. Hiding it until after she committed would have made me Gareth with better manners. So, I gave her the rule before the proof. Monster meat was the source of my stolen skills, and nullification was the reason I survived it. Then I said I would kill Broodclaw and eat it in front of her. If she still wanted the party after seeing that, my answer would be yes. I went back under using high-speed swimming, moved faster than the snapfins, cut through the tentacles before they closed, and reached Broodclaw while it was still shedding damaged limbs. Thread manipulation pinned its core to the rock. Lightning Cloak flooded the wound. One aerial slash opened the body, and I finished it before the next batch of spawn could form. When I surfaced, Selena was watching. I dragged Broodclaw onto the bank, cut away a safe-looking piece, and ate it while she stood close enough to see everything. The meat gave me autotomy and strengthened my swimming, and Selena's face went still. Then, she walked away. Would you have read that silence the same way I did? Those silent minutes hurt worse than the fight. The first person who had chosen me had finally seen what that choice required, and I believed she had left. Selena returned carrying firewood. The riverbank fought Selena harder than the monsters had. Her first wet bundle collapsed in her arms, so she wrestled a second pile of branches into submission and returned annoyed at the wood instead of me. We had a party. She had also brought dry cloth for my soaked coat and ordinary fish for herself. That preparation answered me before she spoke. Nobody planning to leave spends 10 minutes fighting wet branches for a shared dinner. She dropped it beside the monster, asked whether I planned to make her eat cold fish, and started building a fire like nothing had changed. Her happiness came from one simple fact: I had trusted her before asking for trust back. While the fire caught, I told her the full origin, the Minotaur under the broken floor, and the monsterization. Nullification erased. Then I explained why the surviving skills stayed behind, and why the cookware in my magic bag was combat equipment. Selena listened without interrupting, asked exactly 2 questions, then accepted the answer without pretending it was normal. I warned her that the meat could kill or transform anyone without nullification. Selena admitted it smelled unfairly good, declined the risk, and looked offended when I seemed disappointed. So I cooked ordinary silverfin for her and broodclaw for myself. We ate beside the remains while the river settled, and Selena asked once more whether I would become her partner. This time, I took her hand and said yes. She squeezed hard enough to make the answer official. I thought forming a party with a former S-rank elf would make ranking up easier. It did, right up until our first real mission turned my dinner into a magic lesson with teeth. 2 days later, Selena marched into the Dunhaven Guild with me beside her and placed her S-rank guild card on the receptionist's counter. We were there to register our party, and the receptionist kept looking from Selena's name to my E-rank card as if the ink had personally betrayed her. The receptionist stamped our names onto one party card, and a nearby adventurer stopped laughing when the seal flashed. The guild had made the partnership official in front of everyone, so the usual rumor about Selena merely thanking her rescuer now had a signed problem. The receptionist reminded Selena that I was the Blight Scavenger. Selena replied that she knew exactly who I was, then asked for the hardest legal mission that could build my battle record fast. The woman behind the counter offered an escort request first. Selena tapped my E-rank card and asked for something nobody could dismiss as luck. Did Selena enjoy watching every nearby adventurer reconsider my rank? She looked delighted. Meanwhile, every adventurer close enough to hear was trying to decide whether I had saved Selena, bewitched her, or won an S-rank partner in a tavern contest. The last theory was ridiculous. Selena would have won that contest too. The guild gave us a Grey Wolf subjugation because the pack had expanded beyond the safe hunting zone. The monsters were only level 11, but enough of them could erase a merchant caravan, and the last patrol had counted 20. Selena refused an easier escort because she wanted a result nobody could dismiss as luck. By late afternoon, Selena and I reached the wolf territory. I used stealth to move ahead while echolocation mapped the brush. Selena stayed high in a tree and summoned Zephyra, her wind spirit, for the first time in front of me. Zephyra appeared as a small bright figure wrapped in spinning air. She looked at the wolves, looked at Selena, and then plucked one hair from my head for no tactical reason whatsoever. Selena claimed Zephyra had good taste. I asked whether assaulting the party leader was standard spirit etiquette. Selena reminded me she had registered herself as leader before I finished reading the form. The first wave rushed my position. Paralyzing breath slowed the front line while Selena and Zephyra drove cutting wind through both sides. One wolf broke toward Selena, and I caught it with thread manipulation before its jaws reached the tree. Another leaped at me from behind, and Zephyra slammed it into the ground before I even turned. Selena saw the next gap before I did, and sent wind through it, while echolocation found 2 wolves hiding below the ridge. That was the party chemistry we needed. I found what she could not see, and her range covered every direction I could not reach. The pack kept trying to isolate one of us, and discovered the other one was already there. The visible pack fell quickly, but echolocation found more bodies lying flat beyond the ridge. The hidden wolves waited for us to relax, then rose together and charged from 3 sides. I used stealth to vanish from the center and let them commit. The hidden leader rushed the place where I had been standing, and the whole second pack followed because they believed the weak member had finally been separated. Selena bent all 3 charging lines inward with great wind. Zephyra drove the stragglers back toward the herd, and I appeared behind the leader and released paralyzing breath across the packed group. The wolves lost their legs at the exact moment Selena dropped the final wind strike through them. The leader tried to crawl out of the pile, so I pinned it with thread manipulation and ended the mission before the pack could scatter into the forest. When the dust settled, 52 wolves lay across the field. 52 bodies is enough to make you reconsider every joke about the E-rank holding the knife. Selena checked the count twice because the guild had expected fewer than 30. Zephyra hovered over the ridge looking pleased with herself, and one surviving patrolman stopped asking whether we were a real party. 52 bodies had answered him. She told me our first mission proved she had chosen well. I told her the wolves had done most of the work by arriving in convenient groups. She accused me of false humility, which was rich coming from an elf who would later introduce herself as the most humble person alive. On the flight home, Zephyra carried us on a broad current, while Selena explained spirit magic by showing me. Spirits borrowed a caster's human magic power, and affinity decided how long they could work before the caster emptied herself. Zephyra preferred speed and mischief, which she demonstrated by dipping suddenly and making me grab Selena around the waist. Selena insisted the spirit was testing my balance. Zephyra's grin said the spirit was testing something else. Smoke rose beyond the next ridge before either of us could continue that argument. A nearby village was under attack. An ashhorn stood in the main road, a horned monster with magic far above its level, while villagers dragged wounded people toward the fields. It formed a burning spear and launched it at a family trapped beside a wagon. Selena canceled the attack in mid-air with a blade of compressed water. Then she dropped us into the road, checked who could still move, and ordered the local adventurers to evacuate everyone behind the stone storehouses. Appraisal showed Ashhorn at level 27 with abnormally high magic and principal skills I wanted badly. Selena had already spent most of her power on the wolves and the flight, so she couldn't simply overwhelm it. She told me she would cancel its spells while I closed the distance. I accepted because the villagers didn't have time for a cleaner plan. Ashhorn launched fire first, and Selena met it with water until steam filled the road. Earth spikes followed, so Terran broke the ground beneath them and ruined the angle. Every cancellation cost Selena power, but each one opened another step for me. The monster noticed the pattern and started aiming around us. A firebolt struck the wagon beside the trapped family, and Selena redirected the next one while shouting for the father to pull both children under the axle. She was already tired from carrying us home, yet she spent power on people behind her because one missed spell would turn our clean attack into a funeral. The monster shifted to smaller spells aimed past us at the fleeing villagers. Selena cancelled those too, even though protecting people who were already moving drained her faster than protecting herself. Meanwhile, Ashhorn kept one hand hidden behind its body, saving a stronger cast for the moment I committed. I saw the fingers flex through the steam and changed my approach. Instead of charging the center, I used thread manipulation to swing around a broken wagon. The hidden spell tore through the space where my chest should have been. Selena caught the edge with wind, and the blast still ripped a trench through the road. The villagers heard it behind them and ran harder. The monster realized I was the threat and gathered magic in its fingers. It expected me to charge through the steam, so I sent a thread around the wagon wheel and changed direction at the last second. Physical boost drove me across the final stretch, and I cut through one hand before the spell completed. The unfinished spell detonated against Ashhorn's own shoulder. Villagers watching from the storehouse stopped treating me as the weak distraction and started calling my route through the smoke, which gave Selena better warning whenever the monster shifted toward them. Ashhorn roared and swung its horns. Steel Body took the impact, though the force still threw me across the road. Resistance stopped effects, and it never stopped momentum, which my ribs learned repeatedly. Selena had saved the last of her strength for the opening. Maris, her water spirit, froze the monster's legs while Zephyra drove a compressed wind blade through the wound I had opened. Ashhorn fell before it could rebuild the spell. The village survived. The Reeve lowered the evacuation bell, then redirected everyone who could stand into carrying the wounded. The same father Selena had protected pulled another injured family from behind the wagon, and an old woman still hit the Ashhorn's corpse with her broom on the way past. Gratitude and anger were sharing a schedule. A village fighter asked how an E-rank adventurer had crossed Ashhorn's spell range. Selena answered that I wouldn't stay E-rank long, and she said it loudly enough for every survivor to hear. That public confidence embarrassed me more than the praise, which was exactly why she enjoyed giving it. Then Selena announced that we were pursuing the monster's trail into the forest. There was no trail, and she was keeping the villagers away while I cooked Ashhorn in secret. At a forest camp beyond the village, I made soup from the usable meat. Selena watched the pot with the expression of someone who knew it could kill her and still resented me for adding seasoning. She accepted ordinary food from the villagers and tried one spoonful of broth that hadn't touched the monster meat. Then she declared, "My dinner smelled better," and blamed me personally. I ate a proper piece and gained principles of fire magic, principles of earth magic, and fire resistance. The descriptions promised instinctive use, so I raised one hand and expected Ashhorn's power to answer me. Branches snapped around the camp. A herd of dashboars charged through the trees. I raised one hand, aimed principles of fire magic, and released absolutely nothing. The leading pig hit the camp, kicked dirt over the pot, and trampled the meal Selena and I had spent an hour earning. Selena stared at the ruined soup, then at my empty hand, and decided the first lesson would happen from somewhere the pigs couldn't reach. I tried earth magic, and nothing. The dashboars turned for another charge, and Selena grabbed my collar before culinary rage convinced me to test Steel Body against an entire herd. Zephyra lifted us into the branches while the animals tore through the camp below. From the tree, I appraised the new skills again. The page said they should work, and Selena started looking for the missing fuel while the dashboars circled below to supervise. We spent the next few minutes in that tree while the dashboars circled below, and Selena worked through the problem out loud. My fire magic used human magic power, and Selena's spirits used the same resource. The stolen principle skills kept referring to mana, which meant I owned the spell and had never touched its fuel. Selena made me stop looking at the status words and feel what happened inside my body after eating. Beneath my ordinary magic power sat a heavier reservoir, warm and restless, built from every monster meal I had swallowed. She had me move that pressure from my stomach to my palm, then back again without casting, because throwing the whole reservoir at one spell would probably set the forest and my eyebrows on fire. A dashboar slammed the trunk hard enough to shake us, which made an excellent teaching environment. I pulled a thread of that stored monster mana through my arm and activated principles of fire magic again. This time, flame exploded across the ground and caught 3 pigs mid-charge. Human magic power gathered near my chest. Monster mana sat deeper in muscle and bone, and my first burst spread too wide, scorched the trunk beneath Selena, and earned a look promising future supervision. I narrowed the next flow through my wrist, the flame tightened, and then I pushed the reservoir into my legs and felt Flash Step waiting in the dashboard meet before I had even named the skill. Learning under pressure was ugly, but the enemy supplied immediate feedback. The herd scattered, and I dropped from the tree, followed with principles of earth magic, and drove stone upward beneath the rest. The same animals that had trampled our dinner became the replacement dinner before they understood the menu had changed. Selena named the distinction cleanly. Human magic power fueled spells and spirit contracts. Stored monster mana fueled stolen principles, body reinforcement, and anything the meat had taught me. Eating refilled that reservoir, so yes, my emergency ration could update my combat build. I packed cooked portions as reserve mana. Selena accused me of turning lunch into military planning, and I reminded her lunch had started it. The dashboard meat gave me Flash Step, a short straight-line burst. I tested it between two trees, overshot the second one, and Selena laughed until a deeper roar shook the clearing. A dashboard king burst through the brush, level 38 and broad enough to turn our ruined camp into a footnote. It charged Selena first because she had landed closest to its herd. I used Flash Step and reached her a heartbeat before the tusks. Physical boost carried us both aside and the king smashed through the tree behind us. Then it stepped on the second pot. How many dinners does one pig get to ruin before the fight becomes personal? My answer was 2. Selena looked at the wrecked meal, then at me, and physically grabbed my sleeve because she knew rage had just become my tactical plan. I hit the king with fire. Its hide resisted the heat. Earth spikes cracked under its weight, and wind attacks slid around the body without cutting deep. The monster had one strategy, a straight charge backed by absurd endurance, and unfortunately that strategy kept working. Selena tried to turn its head with Zephyra while I attacked the flank. The king ignored the cut, plowed through a fallen tree, and forced us apart. Every failed strike made it more confident, and every smashed pot made me less interested in restraint. The king clipped my hip on the next pass and sent me through the remains of our camp. Selena used Great Wind to turn its head before it finished me, then had to drop the spell when her human magic power dipped. The monster's plan was simple enough for a child to understand, and its body was strong enough to make understanding useless unless I changed the exchange. I tried venom at the wound near its eye. The thick hide slowed the poison. I tried thread manipulation around the legs, but one jerk snapped the lines. Each failed answer removed an option and pushed me toward the blade I already knew couldn't handle full mana. Selena was low on magic. My normal sword had already started bending from the mana pressure I was pushing through my arm. If I fought a long battle, the king would outlast the weapon before I outlasted the pig, so I used Roar. Roar caught the dashboard king mid-charge and pulled it off Selena before the tusk reached her ribs. The Minotaur had given me that skill while Crimson Edge used me as bait. Now I was choosing the target myself. The Minotaur's voice hit the clearing and forced the dashboard king's attention onto me. It lowered its head and charged in a straight line, too angry to turn and too heavy to stop. I pulled monster mana through my shoulders, into both hands and down the blade. Selena recognized the idea as weapon reinforcement, except trained fighters used human magic power and years of practice. I was doing it with monster mana because a pig had ruined dinner twice. The king reached me, and I stepped across its line with Flash Step and swung once. The mana-charged blade cut the dashboard king in half. The cut traveled from shoulder to belly before the beast's momentum stopped, so both halves slid past me and carved parallel tracks through the dirt. Selena had raised a barrier for the expected collision. She lowered it slowly, staring at the clean line through hide that had resisted every spell we owned. Boom! Both halves hit the ground behind me. Selena stared at the body, then at my sword, because she had just watched an untrained former E-rank improvise a technique that experienced fighters spent years learning. The blade cracked from tip to guard and shattered in my hands. The broken pieces kept humming with leftover mana. I picked them up because Hank had repaired that sword more times than I could count. Selena wrapped the cuts in my palm while reminding me that winning and destroying every tool I owned was a terrible business model. I had found a way to put monster mana through a weapon, and ordinary steel couldn't survive it. While Selena and I packed the meat, the 3 men who had stolen my Blightgrass room were making their own terrible discovery back in the Blightmist labyrinth. Oren, Emmett, and Fletcher found a hidden stair behind the chamber they had taken from me. They had spent years sharing failed missions, cheap drinks, and the belief that one lucky haul would fix everything. The passage led to a sealed chest wrapped in old warning marks. Emmett wanted to leave it alone because every part of the room was screaming curse. Fletcher wanted the treasure because Caution had never paid their rent. Oren opened the chest. You already know a sealed dungeon chest never contains a sensible financial decision. Fletcher joked that if the Blight Scavenger could land a famous elf companion, then the three of them deserved one lucky treasure. The comparison pushed Oren harder because my sudden rise had become proof, in his mind, that shortcuts were real. He had mocked me for being beneath him, and now every rumor about Selena made the sealed chest feel like the world offering his place back. Inside lay a black sword with red lines running through the blade. Emmett told him not to touch it. Fletcher mocked him for being afraid of free loot, and Oren chose the sword because he was tired of being the weakest man in every tavern story. The blade wanted that exact kind of owner. Emmett suggested taking the unopened chest to the guild for a discovery fee. Fletcher laughed at sharing easy money, and Oren heard only that caution would keep him poor. He wrapped the sword, claimed it as his share, and never noticed the metal tighten against his palm. By the time Selena and I returned to Dunhaven, I needed a weapon before the next monster turned my bare hands into the backup plan. So we went to Hammer and Hearthforge. Hank Reddick had repaired my cheap gear for years and never mocked me for entering Blightmist. He knew every embarrassing bend in my old sword and cared whether metal failed honestly, and impressive owners bored him. I placed the broken hilt and the elite magic stones on Hank's counter. He looked at the clean fracture, asked what I had hit, then asked what had hit the sword. I told him a Dashboar King, followed by my monster mana. Then I explained the eating because a smith couldn't build around power he didn't understand. Selena watched Hank carefully, ready for disgust. Hank rubbed his beard and asked whether monster meat tasted good. I admitted it depended on seasoning. That was all the judgment he had. Hank examined the stones, accepted a commission for a mana-resistant sword, and warned the work would take time. He cared about the force entering the metal. Respectable dinners bored him. Until the new blade was ready, he handed me a loner and repeated that it was fragile until I promised to stop testing it with boss monsters. Selena noticed I trusted Hank enough to reveal everything. On the walkout, I apologized for having exactly one old friend in Dunhaven. She told me one was a start and that she could repair the number, and she charged more than Hank. That evening, we returned to the bottomless bowl for food and rest. Oren, Emmett, and Fletcher were already there with the wrapped black sword beside their table. They recognized me immediately, and Fletcher looked at Selena, looked back at me, and his old contempt turned into the sour envy of a man watching somebody he mocked upgrade in public. Selena saw the three men approaching and offered a drinking contest before they finished the first insult. She had found one social weapon and intended to use it on every problem until the world adapted. Oren never answered. He collapsed beside the table. Red-black light leaked from the wrapped sword and climbed his arm. Emmett knelt to help, but Oren's eyes opened under a dark aura and his hand moved faster than any of them expected. The blade cut Emmett across the shoulder. Emmett hit the floor clutching the wound, and the red lines on the black sword brightened in response to blood. Fletcher reached for Oren's wrist, then recoiled when the sword pulled Oren's arm with strength that didn't belong to him. The trio had spent years acting inseparable. One cursed object broke that illusion in seconds. Fletcher shouted Oren's name, and tavern patrons scrambled away, knocking over chairs while the retired manager started dragging civilians behind the bar. Oren stood with the sword fused against his palm. His body had changed, his strength had surged, and the thing inside the weapon was already feeding on every drop of fear in the room. He turned toward Selena and attacked. I caught the cursed blade with Hank's loner. Metal screamed against metal. The black sword pushed hard enough to crack the floor under my boots, and Hank's warning about fragile equipment suddenly felt extremely current. The loner blade held for the first impact, which was already more loyalty than Oren was getting from the sword attached to his hand. Appraisal showed madness, a violent rise in every physical stat, and a condition called blade symbiosis spreading from his palm toward his shoulder. The black weapon was Grimfang, the sentient curse inside the sword. Blade symbiosis was the bond it used to take a wielder, and the red-black growth moving under Oren's skin meant the takeover had already started. Selena threw a wind blade at his legs. Grimfang drank the magic before it reached him, and the red lines along the sword brightened. Oren's cut shoulder closed, and his speed increased. That was the rule, biting us in real time. Magic fed the curse, wounds regenerated, and every careful spell made the next attack worse. The tavern manager pushed the last civilian through the kitchen door and sealed it with a healing barrier meant for emergencies. Fletcher dragged Emmett behind an overturned table while shouting that Oren could still hear them. Oren answered by cutting the table in half. Emmett crawled toward me and begged us not to kill his friend. He admitted the truth under years of swagger. The three of them failed missions together, stole my harvest room because they were desperate, and mocked me because seeing someone lower made them feel less pathetic. The stolen room and years of mockery stayed on the bill, but now I knew what the cruelty had been hiding, and killing Oren became harder. I told Selena to give me 1 minute. She hated the promise because she understood what I planned. Substitute had removed her curse, drunkenness, and every condition that accepted the transfer. If I could pull blade symbiosis into myself, nullification might erase it before Grimfang found another host. I wrapped Oren's sword arm with thread manipulation while Selena fought close enough to avoid feeding the weapon with magic. She moved like the former S-rank she was, using her blade to redirect his wrists and her body to control distance. Oren was stronger, but Selena understood people better than the curse understood swordsmanship. Grimfang kept forcing Oren into broad killing swings because the curse valued power over balance. Selena stepped inside each arc, struck the elbow, and made the weapon hit tables instead of bodies. Emmett crawled between fallen chairs to clear civilians' dropped weapons, while Fletcher shouted childhood insults only Oren would recognize, trying to pull his friend toward the surface. For a few seconds, it worked. Oren's left hand resisted the sword arm. The curse answered by flooding him with more strength and reopening the cut on Emmett so the smell of blood filled the room. Terran burst from the floor and caught Oren's ankle. Grimfang absorbed the first magic surge, yet the physical stone held for half a second. I used that half second to grab Oren's arm. He had to accept substitute, so I shouted his name and told him to fight the thing long enough to say yes. For one breath, Oren came back. The red light faded from one eye. He looked at Emmett, then Fletcher, and begged me to help him. I activated substitute. The curse moved 1 inch toward my hand and stopped. Grimfang screamed inside the room. The sword had its own will, and a hostile sentient source could reject the transfer even when its victim accepted. The curse tore itself away from my skill, fed on the contact, and swallowed the last piece of Oren's control. Pain shot through my hand where substitute had touched the bond. Nullification erased the invading curse, but it couldn't force Grimfang to leave a host it still owned. Selena saw the failed transfer in my face and changed her stance before I spoke. Hope had lasted exactly as long as the sword allowed. How do you save a man when the weapon can refuse the cure? Grimfang's answer was to take the rest of him. Emmett reached for Oren's shoulder and stopped when the sword snapped toward him. Fletcher raised a healing charm, but the paper blackened before it touched the wound. Selena released Oren only after the red light faded, while I kept my substitute hand ready in case his body moved again. His body twisted into a two-headed monster, both faces stretched around the same red-black rage. Grimfang had finished the takeover. Selena met my eyes and gave the answer neither of us wanted. The curse had fused through his heart. Destroying the heart was the only way to free him now. There was no joke left in the tavern. Oren rushed, and Selena slipped under the first blade, drove her elbow into his ribs, and cut the tendon behind one knee. The wound closed almost immediately. I filled the room with smoke from poison scale powder because Grimfang could absorb magic, not ordinary choking debris. The curse lost sight of our positions. Terran caught the leg again, Selena called the opening, and Emmett threw himself onto Oren's sword arm despite the blade cutting through his coat. Terran shaped a stone point toward Oren's heart, but Grimfang twisted his body and absorbed the magic before it landed. The near hit proved the target was reachable while also removing Selena's cleanest magical route. That was when Fletcher stepped into the smoke beside Emmett instead of running from it. Fletcher stood frozen with his weapon in both hands. Oren had been his closest friend, the man who shared every failed mission and every stolen drink. He also knew each second of hesitation let the curse reach more people. I held the body, and Selena trapped the second arm. Emmett shouted for Fletcher to do it. Fletcher drove his sword through Oren's heart. He did not close his eyes. Oren had asked for help while he was still present, and Fletcher made himself watch the answer land. Emmett held the cursed arm down until the strength vanished, taking another cut rather than let the final swing reach his friend. The two-headed form stopped. The red light left the tavern in stages. First, the extra face collapsed, then the fused armor peeled away from Oren's chest. Finally, his hand released the sword, and the room heard the ordinary sound of metal hitting wood after minutes of something inhuman screaming through it. Grimfang pulled one final scream through Oren's mouth, then the red growth collapsed into the black blade. Oren looked like himself again for the last few seconds. His eyes found Fletcher, and his expression softened because he understood who had freed him. Then he died. The tavern stayed silent around Oren's body. Emmett dropped beside him, and Fletcher kept both hands locked on his own sword, because letting go would make the choice real. His shoulders shook while he apologized to a man who could no longer answer. I had cleared poison, miasma, paralysis, drunkenness, and Selena's curse. Grimfang was alive enough to refuse the transfer, and Oren paid for the limit. Grimfang lay beside the body, still whispering for another hand. I picked it up. The curse rushed into my arm, and vanished against abnormal status nullification. The possession failed, and its strength, magic absorption, and voice remained. "Kill!" Grimfang growled inside my head. "I told my new metal roommate to shut up!" Guildmaster Calvin Dorsey arrived after the fight with armed guild members and found Fletcher kneeling beside Oren. The killing choice already belonged to Fletcher, and the weapon already belonged to me. Calvin arrived in time to lock in the consequence and decide who could safely carry Grimfang. Calvin ordered 2 guards to secure the empty blade first. Grimfang snarled when either man approached, and the red lines brightened until I touched the hilt again. That made the ownership clearer than any registration form. The sword stayed with me because I was the only known person it couldn't possess. If that immunity failed, Selena had permission to kill me before Grimfang found another host. She accepted the condition a little too quickly. I asked whether she wanted time to think, and Selena informed me she had already planned 3 methods. Grimfang approved of her. That worried me more than the threat. The guild doors opened before anyone could continue. 2 workers carried in a survey adventurer whose skin had turned gray under concentrated miasma. A failed purification charm had blackened against his chest, and every breath sounded like he was drowning on dry land. Calvin named the source while I knelt beside the man. Miasma Dragon. Varkos had occupied the lower floors of Cedar Ridge, and the pressure spreading from the labyrinth already threatened both Dunhaven and Marrowgate. Survey teams couldn't approach the dragon because their charms failed before they reached it. The survivor accepted substitute with one weak nod. I held his wrist, pulled the miasma into myself, and nullification erased it. Gray skin returned to normal from the fingers upward, and his next breath came without the drowning rattle. He grabbed Calvin's sleeve and warned that the air grew worse every floor below the survey mark. That live survivor made the mission obvious faster than another briefing. A large party would become a row of victims Selena and I had to protect while fighting a level 70+ dragon. My immunity could carry one partner through the poison, and Selena's spirits gave us the range to reach the thing producing it. So I told Calvin to send the 2 of us. He hated the numbers, but the cured surveyor was sitting up in front of him and every other tool had already failed. Calvin assigned the subjugation because my resistance was the only route through the miasma. He offered support at the entrance, ordered healers to prepare for our return, and kept reinforcements above ground in case Cedar Ridge destabilized. The officials could prepare the city. The dragon still belonged to whoever reached it. Then he suggested Selena could stay behind while I entered alone. Selena tightened one glove and told him any plan that left me underground without her was already dead. She had survived one party collapse by being separated from people she loved, and she was done letting other people volunteer her for that pain. Outside the guild, I apologized for assuming she would come. Selena stopped walking and said partners faced danger together, and I owed the apology for pretending she had no choice. I asked whether that was her tender way of saying she cared. Selena told me to keep moving before she demonstrated the first anti-possession method. By nightfall, we entered the Cedar Ridge labyrinth. Miasma-corrupted hobgoblins rushed us on the upper floors with swollen bodies and broken instincts. Grimfang swallowed their spells while I cut through them, and Selena used Zephyra to clear the path without wasting power. One hobgoblin tried to crawl away after the fight, then turned back toward the lower floors as if the dragon's miasma was pulling harder than fear. The deeper we went, the heavier the air became. Purification charms cracked in Selena's hand. Her vision blurred, her steps shortened, and she kept pretending to inspect the walls whenever her knees softened. Stormcrest had taught her to hide weakness until hiding it became dangerous. I took her hand and activated Substitute. The miasma moved through our contact into me, where nullification erased it. Selena's breathing steadied immediately, but ongoing exposure meant the connection had to stay unbroken. We adjusted our fighting around one joined hand, she cast with the other, I kept Grimfang on the outside, and Zephyra cleared anything that tried to split us. So we continued down the stairs holding hands while Grimfang complained about the lack of blood. Selena told the sword it was third-wheeling. I pointed out that this made the descent a date, and she tightened her grip while claiming the extra pressure improved the transfer. You can decide which explanation was doing more work. 5 floors below us, a dragon was poisoning 2 regions, and the sword whispering in my head wanted to eat before I did. Before going 5 floors deeper, I detected 2 unfamiliar bodies rolling through a side tunnel. Thermal search painted them as hot armored spears, and I told Selena we should test Grimfang before asking it to cut dragon scales. Would you have bought that tactical excuse? Selena certainly didn't. Selena looked at the rolling beetles, then at the cookware inside my magic bag, and correctly accused me of wanting to eat them. I told her the detour was mostly tactical. She asked which part was not tactical. I declined to provide a percentage. The first beetle curled into a ball and launched itself down the tunnel. Principles of earth magic rose beneath it, but the armored body crushed through the stone without slowing. Terran caught the second creature in a wall of packed earth while I met the rolling one with Grimfang. The black blade cut a shallow line and bounced away. Grimfang took that personally because the sword had spent the entire descent whispering about killing, and now a bug had made it look weak in front of Selena. Selena fed a controlled surge of S-rank magic into the blade. Grimfang absorbed it, the red lines blazed and the weapon expanded in my hands. The next swing split the rolling beetle through its armor and carried into the second before Terran released it. The second beetle curled tighter, but the S-rank charge inside Grimfang cut through both armor layers. The blade shrank after the strike, proving the amplification spent stored magic. Every empowered swing against Varkos would have a hard limit. The tunnel went quiet, and Grimfang demanded more. I ate enough beetle meat to restore my monster mana, cut my thumb, and pressed a blooded high-grade stone against Grimfang. The sword swallowed it into the guard and grew longer, heavier, and much happier. Then the voice stopped sounding like a vague curse and spoke directly inside my head. Dragon. I told the hungry metal roommate we were already going. Varkos answered before we reached the stairs. Its roar slammed through the labyrinth and collapsed the ceiling behind us. The normal route cracked, stone poured into the stairwell, and the miasma pressure rose hard enough to bend Selena's wind barrier. Selena looked at the blocked floors and decided patience had expired. She summoned Terran beneath us, drove a pillar through the weakened floor, and dropped us straight down through the next level. Zephyra caught the fall, and then she did it again. We broke through intervening floors until heat rolled up from a chamber large enough to hold a fortress. Thermal search found Varkos before the smoke cleared. The miasma dragon was level 75, with enormous vitality, poison, fire, miasma, and resistances built to punish the direct fight we had brought. Its body covered half the chamber, black scales layered over red heat, and every breath pushed toxic fog across the stone. Once a level 75 dragon starts melting stone, you stop asking for an elegant plan and start counting exits. The dragon had already noticed us. Its pupils followed the hand linking Selena to me, and Varkos understood the contact mattered before the first attack. The dragon aimed its opening breath between us, forcing a choice between breaking the substitute connection and taking the full blast together. We separated for the dodge, and miasma immediately started building in Selena again. That first move established the whole fight. Varkos' plan was simple: keep us apart until Selena collapsed, then kill the survivor. Varkos opened with fire, and the breath melted the floor where we had been standing. Zephyra threw Selena sideways while thread manipulation pulled me to a pillar. Fire resistance kept the heat from killing me outright, but the physical blast still tore skin from my arms and threw stone through my shoulder. I rushed the flank with physical boost and swung Grimfang at the nearest leg. The blade bit deeper than my old sword could have, yet the scale closed around the cut before I reached flesh. Selena sent Cinder's fire into one eye, Maris's water against the breath, and Terran's stone around the tail. Varkos ripped free, swept the chamber, and launched quills from its back. Luxon's light barrier stopped the first spread. The second broke through, pinned my coat to a wall, and forced Selena to choose between freeing me and keeping the miasma off herself. She cut the cloth with wind and took another lungful of poison to do it. The scales resisted cutting. Ordinary elements slid off the body, and its tail controlled the ground. Varkos slowed down and began rotating attacks to drain Selena, fire at me, quills at her, then a tail sweep through Zephyra's path. The dragon was separating our support chain one response at a time. I changed the rhythm by letting one quill cut my side so I could keep moving toward the neck. The injury gave Bloodlust something to work with, and Grimfang absorbed the spell hiding behind the quills. The dragon's head snapped toward the sword, finally treating the weapon as more than an annoyance. Grimfang loved the attention and tried to pull my arm toward the throat before the opening existed. I had to fight the sword's hunger while fighting the dragon's timing, which was an excellent reminder that my weapon counted as a second problem. One quill opened my shoulder and another cut Selena's palm. Our hands broke apart for half a breath, the miasma slammed back into her lungs, and Varkos learned exactly where to aim next. Selena saw the pattern too. She told me to buy time while she summoned all 5 spirits for Spirits Quintet: Zephyra, Cinder, Maris, Terran, and Luxon. The technique could combine their elements into one strike, but she would be defenseless while they aligned. Selena's hands shook once as the 5 borrowed forces settled into her weapon. She looked at me instead of the dragon, trusted the charge I had built, and swung before fear could request a meeting. I moved between her and the dragon. Selena used the last safe second to press my hand against hers and clear the fresh miasma. Then she released contact and committed to the cast, trusting me to keep every attack away until the spirits aligned. That trust carried a measurable cost. One clean hit on her would cancel the technique and waste nearly all her remaining power. For the next minute, the fight became one ugly job, keep Varkos looking at me. I used Roar to challenge its own voice. The dragon answered, and the collision shook loose chunks of ceiling. I crossed beneath the tail with Flash Step, cut the same scale twice, and let Grimfang drink a glancing fire spell. When Varkos turned toward Selena, thread manipulation snapped me across its face, and aerial slash opened the eyelid. The damage was small, and the irritation was perfect. Varkos chased me around the chamber, which gave Selena the second she needed. Meanwhile, she was terrified the spell would fail. Stormcrest had taught her what happened when an ultimate attack became the plan everyone trusted, and she refused to let that fear break her concentration again. The 5 spirits aligned behind her. Zephyra fixed the air, Cinder compressed flame, Terran locked the floor, Luxon marked the target, and Maris kept the combined heat from exploding back into Selena. Selena released Spirit's Quintet, and wind compressed the path, and earth locked the dragon's feet. Fire and light pierced the weakened scales, and Maris drove freezing water through the opening. The combined strike tore across Varkos' chest and dropped it into the stone. The blast stripped scales from the heartline, and every spirit flickered from the cost. For one breath, I thought the fight was over. Varkos stood back up, and the attack had opened half its chest, but the heart still beat behind armored bone. Selena fell to one knee, nearly empty, and handed the rest of the fight to me with one line. "Finish it, Declan!" I answered Varkos' next roar and charged. Grimfang had absorbed Selena's magic, beetle stone, and pieces of Varkos' own breath. The empowered blade finally cut through the scales. I opened the shoulder, crossed the ribs, and forced the dragon backward. Then the stored power started draining. Each swing became slower, and Grimfang shrank toward its normal size, and Varkos realized the weapon's strength was temporary. The dragon stopped protecting its wounds and attacked through them, betting that my borrowed power would run out before its vitality did. Miasma wave erupted from its body. Nullification erased the poison, but the wave carried physical force, and it threw me across the chamber into a stone column. Before I could stand, Varkos' claw hit my chest and drove me through the broken base. My vision narrowed, and bloodlust restored enough health to keep my body moving, though it couldn't repair the burns, fractures, or mana already spent. Grimfang demanded more power, and Selena had almost none left. A slow battle meant we lost. 2 pillars gave my threads an anchor. Varkos' breath gave Grimfang one final charge, and Selena had enough water left to blind it for 1 second. We had one attempt. Varkos prepared another full fire breath. I anchored thread manipulation to 2 pillars behind me and pulled the lines tight around my waist, turning my own body into a loaded projectile. Selena understood the angle immediately. She summoned the last water Maris could give and held it above the dragon's mouth. The fire came. I released the threads. They launched me straight into the breath. Fire resistance kept me conscious. Grimfang absorbed part of the magic, and my body took the rest. The heat burned through my coat and skin while the blast pushed against the thread's momentum. Selena dropped the water into the center of the breath. Steam exploded across Varkos' face, blinding it for 1 second. That was enough. I drove through the fire, brought Grimfang over my shoulder, and poured every remaining strand of monster mana into the blade. The strike entered the wound Spirit's Quintet had opened. Grimfang absorbed the edge of the breath until its guard glowed white, and the thread snapped behind me as the blade reached the heart. It cut Varkos in half. One blow. The dragon's body separated behind me, and the miasma pressure dropped so fast the whole chamber seemed to inhale. Selena's 5 spirits vanished one after another from exhaustion. She stayed upright long enough to see both halves stop moving, then sat down hard and laughed because neither of us had enough energy left for a dignified reaction. The same toxic fog that had bent her steps thinned around us, and the first clean breath told us the kill had changed more than one room. Far above, every cracked purification charm would stop darkening because Varkos was no longer feeding the air. Grimfang whispered that the dragon smelled good. I told the sword to wait its turn. Bloodlust gave me enough recovery to crawl rather than collapse. We rested beside the corpse until Selena could stand, then I cut usable meat and cooked it with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Varkos' steak was rich enough to make every earlier monster meal feel like practice. Selena took ordinary rations, watched me eat, and complained that immortality through food should come with worse flavor. The meal restored my mana and gave me venomous stingers, stronger poison and miasma resistance, and denser body reinforcement. Grimfang absorbed some of the power through our bond and stopped complaining for almost a full minute. Deeper in the chamber, we found the labyrinth core. It sustained Cedar Ridge, controlled teleportation, and could let Varkos resurrect if we left it intact. Adventurers preserved cores because renewable labyrinths meant treasure, missions, and money. Appraisal listed enough value to buy a house, a new sword, and several improved personalities. Selena warned that breaking it would erase Cedar Ridge as a resource. Dunhaven would lose missions, merchants would lose trade, and Lord Price in Marrowgate would probably claim ownership of the ashes. I pointed at the dragon corpse. Leaving the core meant Varkos could return and poison 2 cities again. The profit was real, and so was the body that had nearly killed us to protect it. I broke the core. The light died under my fist, clean air rushed through the chamber, and Cedar Ridge's future profits vanished with the dragon's resurrection path. Selena stared at the glittering pieces like I had personally offended economics, then kicked one shard away from the corpse and helped me pack the last Varkos meat. She disagreed with the price and never asked me to undo the choice. Far above us, Calvin waited beside the teleport circle while the guild counted the minutes since our last signal. He had sent the regional emergency call wider, and every silent minute made him more certain he had asked 2 people to enter a grave. The Dunhaven Guild, Calvin was still waiting beside the dark return circle when it flashed hard enough to bleach the floor. Selena and I hit the stone together, alive, filthy, and carrying the remains of a dragon nobody expected us to beat. The completion mark named Varkos, level 75, and confirmed that the Cedar Ridge core was gone. The receptionist read it twice. Calvin read the same line, then ordered the guild doors opened before the result could become a quiet note on somebody's desk. Adventurers filled the hall and spilled into the street. People who once laughed when I carried Blightgrass moved aside when they saw Grimfang, my burned coat, and the dragon meat packed behind me. The survey survivor I had cured offered me his chair. I left it with him, and that small choice made the nearest doubters stop whispering. A chant for the Emerald Gale started first. Then somebody shouted, "Blight Scavenger!" and the old insult came back with a different meaning. This time, people cheered the name because the scavenger had entered poison nobody else could survive and returned with the source in pieces. One low-rank porter near the door touched the strap on his own backpack and looked at me like the job had just become survivable. That reaction hit harder than the chant. The label Gareth had used to mark disposable baggage was now making another baggage carrier stand straighter. I enjoyed that more than a mature person probably should have. Meanwhile, Lord Alden Price heard the news in Marrowgate and raged because he had expected Cedar Ridge to become his city's private treasure source. An advisor suggested demanding compensation from Dunhaven for destroying property Marrowgate had never owned. The dragon had been dead for less than a day, and somebody was already invoicing the corpse. Selena and I ignored that problem long enough to cook Varkos steak outside the city. The meat was expensive in every possible sense, and I treated the first plate with the respect due to a level 75 meal. You kill a dragon, you eat the expensive cut. I wasn't wasting that symmetry. Selena wanted to visit every good restaurant in Dunhaven now that the curse was gone. I told her the premium menu was already in front of us. She pointed out that my menu had tried to burn us alive 6 hours earlier. 4 days later, Calvin called us back for the reward. The Wolf and Ashhorn missions had already moved me from E rank to D rank, and the dragon victory forced another re-evaluation before the new badge had time to scratch. Calvin placed a heavy pouch on the table, 1.5 million gold crowns. The number meant I could stop measuring meals against rent. It meant proper equipment, months without scavenging, and enough money to make every old bully suddenly remember we had shared a room once. For once, every supply in the magic bag belonged to my own plan. The receptionist slid the pouch toward me with both hands because it was too heavy for one. A tavern regular who once joked about my imaginary basement rank immediately started telling people he had always believed in me. Public memory improves very quickly around 1.5 million crowns. Selena watched my face and asked whether I planned to sleep on the coins. I told her only if the magic bag could make them comfortable. She informed me wealth hadn't improved my standards. My updated guild card showed level 52. That put me above Selena's current level. I smiled before I could stop myself. Selena leaned over the card and reminded me that level measured raw growth, while experience measured how quickly she could still put me on the floor. She was smiling too, and suddenly I wanted to know when she planned to demonstrate. The guild doors opened before I could ask for a demonstration. Lord Alden Price entered with Marrowgate's guildmaster Conrad Fitch and a small official escort. Their branch had already received the raid report, so they knew the two Varkos conquerors, and they knew the Blight Scavenger nickname before they crossed the room. Alden looked at Selena first because former S-rank status matched the hero he expected. Then he recognized me and openly asked whether Dunhaven had put the wrong man beside her. Selena answered before Calvin could. Varkos had threatened both cities, Marrowgate had sent nobody capable of reaching it, and the people who stopped its resurrection made the final choice. Alden's compensation claim died in 3 sentences, so Conrad attacked the person instead. Conrad had heard the high-rank rumors about Stormcrest and Selena's curse. He called her a fallen elf hiding behind Dunhaven, mocked the dead leader she had failed to save, and asked whether a woman who lost one party should be trusted with another. Selena's face stayed still while wind gathered around her fingers. Calvin stepped between them before the guild hall became a second boss chamber. Selena's argument had already killed the claim. Calvin was saving his building from the aftermath. That was when Lucian Vell arrived. Lucian was a handsome elf with polished armor, excellent posture, and the kind of face that had probably received apologies from mirrors. He had followed guild rumors that Selena had resurfaced in Dunhaven after losing her curse. He entered expecting to rescue her from whatever humiliating arrangement had placed her beside me. The attraction was one-sided before he said a word. Selena recognized him from high-rank circles and looked tired. Lucian looked at her as if the room had finally returned something that belonged to him. He invited Selena to join his party. Then he offered me a handshake, waited until I reached for it, and slapped my hand away. The sound carried across the guild, and Lucian held the smile because he expected the room to treat the insult as natural. Instead, Selena moved one step closer to me. Did anyone need spirit magic to notice the jealousy? Lucian called the Blight Scavenger unworthy of standing beside the Emerald Gale. He credited the Varco's victory to Selena, assumed I had carried supplies, and suggested I leave before higher rank work exposed me. I looked at Selena and she looked at Lucian. Then Selena publicly rejected him. She told Lucian that I had saved her life, cured the level down curse, killed Varcos with her and earned every step beside her. The whole guild heard it. Lucian's confident smile held for another second, then jealousy started eating through it. Selena protected my secret. She told Lucian the curse was gone because I had done what every celebrated expert failed to do. Lucian decided the facts were impossible. So he built a theory that protected his pride. I had manipulated Selena, stolen credit, or hidden behind some cheap trick during the dragon fight. Meanwhile, Conrad enjoyed the conflict because an elf challenging Dunhaven's new hero might weaken Selena's defense of the city. Alden simply wanted somebody else to make the room stop laughing at his compensation claim. I asked Selena whether all elves were this humble. Selena placed a hand on her chest and declared herself extremely humble, understanding, and charming. Lucian immediately claimed he possessed the same qualities while standing in the middle of a guild hall demanding another man's partner. That was when I announced his label. From then on, Lucian was Pride Prince. The receptionist cut through the argument by reading my re-evaluation. The guild was skipping C rank and promoting me directly to B rank for the Cedar Ridge subjugation and the Varco's kill. My new badge landed on the counter. The room erupted, and adventurers who had watched me carry grass came over to congratulate me. Emmett and Fletcher, still carrying Orin's death in their posture, offered a quiet nod. Fletcher told me Orin would have complained about the promotion and then bragged that he knew me. Lucian watched the crowd close around me and decided the day still owed him a cleaner victory. He insulted Dunhaven's standards, and Fletcher told him to shut his mouth. Lucian grabbed Fletcher, threw him across the hall, and pinned him against the floor with a sword at his throat. Selena moved, and I raised one hand and stopped her because Lucian had finally made the challenge direct. Crack. He demanded a duel, and if I deserved B rank in Selena's side, I could prove it in the training yard. If I lost, he expected me to leave her party. Selena told him her choice belonged to her. Lucian heard the words and ignored the meaning because entitlement had already driven the carriage off the road. I accepted for my rank and for Fletcher. Selena's choice was already hers, and Lucian's failure to understand that made what followed much more satisfying. Minutes later, the guild crowded around the training yard. Calvin set one rule: stop when the opponent could no longer continue. He would judge safety, not worthiness. Lucian attacked first. His swordsmanship was better than mine. Haste and physical boost stacked over years of trained footwork, and his magic swordsman technique let him change the blade's element mid-strike. He cut my shoulder, kicked my knee, and drove me backward before I found his rhythm. Every exchange made the same point. Monster meals had given me power faster than years could give me technique. The crowd had expected the dragon killer to dominate. Instead, Lucian controlled the opening, and his confidence returned with every hit. Selena never panicked, and she knew my strengths, but she also knew Lucian was exposing a real weakness. Eating monsters had given me speed and power faster than it gave me human sword training. I stopped trying to beat his technique cleanly. When Lucian enchanted his sword, I let Grimfang catch the blade and absorb the magic. The cursed weapon brightened, and I pushed monster mana through it and answered with a reinforced swing that finally forced him to block with both hands. Lucian felt the power and changed tactics. He coated his weapon in lightning, crossed inside my guard, and struck my ribs. Then he drove lightning palm into my chest. Electricity wrapped around my body. I dropped one knee and let my hand go slack. Lucian stepped close enough to demand surrender. He wanted the whole guild to hear me admit I was a fraud before Selena. The lightning had burned me. The paralysis had done nothing. Abnormal status nullification erased it the instant it arrived. I grabbed Lucian's wrist. His eyes widened because he had stepped close to collect a surrender and found his best status effect missing. Selena folded her arms because she had been waiting for that exact mistake. Fletcher pushed himself upright to see the ending. I pulled Pride Prince forward and headbutted him. Lucian staggered into the same rail he had used as a stage. Fletcher's laugh came back twice as loud, and the guild clerk raised my B-rank badge before Pride Prince had finished finding his balance. The crack carried across the yard. Lucian's lightning vanished, his enchanted blade went dull, and the spectators closest to Selena stepped back because her smile had become openly vicious. Fletcher touched the bruise on his own throat and watched the exact humiliation return to the man who had given it to him. The hit broke his stance. I swept his leg, took his sword, and pinned him against the yard exactly as he had pinned Fletcher in the guild hall. He was cooked, publicly and symmetrically. The crowd's opinion flipped in sound. Adventurers who had doubted the B rank skipped straight to arguing about which part of the duel proved it most. Conrad stopped smiling because the man he had dismissed had just neutralized the high-rank elf's best finish. Selena walked into the yard and asked Lucian whether humility felt different from the ground. Lucian's first reaction was anger. Then he replayed the lightning strike, understood that nullification had erased the paralysis, and finally accepted that the loss was real. He stayed unpleasant, but the contempt had gained a crack. Before Lucian could answer, a guild worker ran through the doors carrying an emergency report. Cedar Ridge had rebuilt itself. B-rank mana covered the entrance, 2 level 50 gargoyles guarded the gate, and the labyrinth we had destroyed was growing again. The emergency report dragged us back inside before Lucian had fully remembered how to stand. Calvin ended Lord Price's compensation argument with one order: every B-rank and higher adventurer was going to Cedar Ridge. The labyrinth had entered a rare cycle. Something had survived the destroyed core, started rebuilding the dungeon around itself, and pulled the internal mana toward A rank, or worse. If the cycle finished, the pressure could break outward into both Dunhaven and Marrowgate. That was the whole briefing, and we moved. By the time we reached the mountain, both cities had formed one openly hostile expedition. Calvin led Dunhaven with his shield. Conrad Fitch led Marrowgate because his pride would rather enter a growing labyrinth than let Dunhaven claim another victory. Selena brought her 5 spirits, Lucian brought excellent swordsmanship and a fresh headache, and I carried Grimfang. An unnamed woman completed the core group. She handled barriers, concealment, and mana control, which made her the person everyone ignored until a spell would have killed them without her. 2 level 50 gargoyles dropped from the entrance before the expedition finished spreading out. Their mouths opened with petrifying breath. The first cloud caught the boots of 2 support fighters before Zephyra drove it upward, and Grey Stone had already climbed to one man's knees. The specialist folded a barrier over the second breath, while Selena used Maris to wash the first condition away before it locked his hips. Conrad cut one gargoyle across the neck, but the stone body kept moving and raked a claw toward the half-petrified fighter. Calvin stepped through the swing, took the impact on his shield, and drove a compressed blow from his free arm. "Void strike!" he barked. The blow caved the gargoyle's chest through its spine. Conrad split the second while Zephyra kept its breath aimed away from the wounded, and the support fighter whose legs had started turning gray hit the ground only after the stone receded. The entrance fight lasted less than a minute. Every adventurer still checked their fingers afterward, and Lucian stopped mocking the extra barriers the specialist had placed around the rear. A mass disable skill at the front door was the labyrinth's way of saying subtlety had resigned. Inside, Cedar Ridge looked familiar until the walls moved. New stone pulsed through old passages, roots crossed corridors that had been empty 4 days earlier, and the usual miasma had thinned because the creature at the center was pulling mana inward for itself. The expedition cut through the first monsters as one machine. Calvin angled heavy bodies into Conrad's strikes. Selena's wind opened lanes for Lucian, and the specialist hid our rear line under concealment so ambushers kept attacking empty space. When one creature tried to climb the wall behind us, Lucian killed it without turning because Calvin had already called the angle. I had fought beside Selena long enough to read one partner. This formation moved through 6 people at once, and every opening depended on somebody else arriving exactly where expected. For several minutes, it looked easy. Then a support fighter activated Warrior's Honor. Strength, speed, and shared timing spread through the expedition. The buff touched me and vanished. Nullification erased helpful conditions with the same enthusiasm it gave poison. What kind of cheat deletes the useful magic and keeps the humiliation? Mine did, right in front of every elite in the chamber. Everyone accelerated together, and I stayed at my normal speed like the only customer denied service during a sale. Lucian looked back and asked whether B rank now came with training wheels. The insult landed because my timing had already slipped. A monster he expected me to cut reached his flank, forcing him out of formation, and Selena had to redirect Zephyra to cover the gap. That pulled wind from Calvin's side and made Conrad take a hit meant for nobody. One missed beat had bent the whole group around me. Conrad called me a solo fighter pretending to belong in a formation. I wanted to argue, and then a burrowing insect hybrid exploded through the floor and gave him better evidence. I used principles of earth magic to crush the tunnel. The creature erased the soil beneath my attack and redirected the stone around its body. My wall split around its shell, leaving the hybrid untouched and throwing loose rock into our own support line. The specialist caught the debris with a barrier. Conrad laughed once, and Lucian announced that the training wheels had fallen off. The creature then burrowed under Calvin's shield and surfaced behind him, proving the failed earth attack had also given away our center. Selena sent Terran into the hole to force it back up, while I used echolocation to call where it would emerge. Selena snapped that their mouths were welcome to help if the noise could kill insects. Calvin took the front, Conrad opened the armored body, and Lucian burned the parasites crawling over its back. I controlled the side tunnels with echolocation and kept the smaller creatures from reaching the support line. The hybrid finally hit the floor with its chest split. Then the parasites crawled inside the corpse. They entered through the split chest, stitched torn muscle with their own bodies, and pulled the dead limbs back under control. The carcass swelled, bones reset with wet cracks, and the thing stood again as Riftmaw. Appraisal showed brutal strength, active regeneration, and soil and earth removal, the same skill that had erased my attack. The expedition had spent its clean formation killing the first body. Riftmaw rose in the middle of us before anyone had returned to position, and a second insect cloud burst from its back. Stone climbed every adventurer at once. Calvin's shield arm locked in front of him. Conrad stayed conscious while rock sealed his chest and throat. Lucian triggered haste, took one fast step, and froze with the anger still visible in his eyes. The specialist raised a barrier, but the insects were already inside it, so the spell trapped the swarm with us. That was the cruel part. Nobody passed out. Every fighter could see Riftmaw moving through the chamber while their bodies became statues. Selena's fingers turned gray around mine, and her eyes went straight to the hand keeping us connected. I stayed mobile. Nullification erased petrification as it entered me. I caught Calvin before his stone body hit the ground and dragged him behind his own shield. He could see and hear everything, but only his eyes moved. Riftmaw charged the last standing target, which was me. I dragged Calvin behind the broken pillar, then grabbed Selena's hand and activated Substitute. She accepted instantly. Stone receded from her fingers while the condition crossed into me and vanished, but the transfer moved slowly because petrification had already reached her shoulders. Riftmaw understood the contact and came straight for our joined hands. If it broke the transfer, the whole expedition stayed trapped and I went back to fighting alone. I took the first hit with steel body and still crossed half the chamber. My grip almost broke, but Selena curled her free fingers into mine and kept the transfer active. She recovered one arm before Riftmaw reached us again and called Zephyra into its face. The wind spirit bought 1 second, and Terran used it to lock both legs. Behind the shield, Calvin forced his trapped arm against the stone until the petrification cracked. The first attempt tore skin from his wrist. He did it again, freed one shoulder through raw strength, then smashed the remaining shell against the floor until he could stand. That gave the counterattack a front line again. Calvin caught Riftmaw's charge and turned the body. Selena freed the rest of herself through Substitute, then sent Zephyra and Terran into both knees. The monster removed the first layer of earth, but Terran replaced it before the legs could reset. I pulled monster mana through Grimfang and kept the flow narrow. The Dashboard King had taught me what happened when I dumped everything into ordinary metal. Varkos had taught me that one clean opening mattered more than 10 loud swings. My first strike opened Riftmaw from shoulder to hip. The wound started closing before the blade left it. Parasites crossed the gap like living stitches, and the two halves pulled toward each other. Venomous stingers spread through the cut before regeneration could rebuild it. Riftmaw tried to remove the poison tissue, so thread manipulation held both sides together for one more second while Selena broke its stance again. Calvin drove his shield into the spine from the other side, giving me a line through the same wound. I cut through the same line. The second strike bisected it. Boom! The halves twitched, the stingers blackened every regeneration channel, and Riftmaw stayed dead. Zephyra scattered the remaining parasites into the ceiling vents while the specialist burned the ones trapped inside her barrier. Then, I started freeing people. Selena and I cleared the last stone from Calvin first. He immediately lifted the specialist away from the parasite vents instead of resting. We moved to Lucian next, and Pride Prince used his first free hand to cut insects off a support fighter before his legs could bend. Conrad was last among the core group. The moment his chest softened, he started pulling petrified adventurers behind Calvin's shield. Each cure changed the chamber. One moving person became 2, then 4, and the statues stopped being a helpless crowd and started carrying one another towards safety. By the time the last person moved, the expedition had learned exactly how useless its rank list became when everyone except the former baggage turned into furniture. Lucian flexed his hands and admitted, "We would have died without me." I told Pride Prince that measurable growth looked good on him. He told me to enjoy the sentence before he recovered. Keeping the secret after that chamber would have been more dangerous than telling it. Every elite had watched me use Minotaur strength, dragon venom, and a cure no normal support fighter possessed, so I gave them the rule in one line: eating monsters let me acquire some native skills, and nullification erased the fatal conditions that made the act taboo. Riftmaw's corpse and the moving people around it had already demonstrated the rest. Calvin accepted the answer first because it matched every impossible thing he had seen. The specialist asked how monster mana stayed separate from human magic power. Conrad simply looked disgusted. Then I cut a clean piece and started cooking. The smell reached the wounded before the argument did, and elite horror turned into betrayed appetite with impressive speed. You would be surprised how fast disgust loses to hot meat after everyone nearly dies as furniture. Only I could eat it safely, but Lucian still asked whether monster food always smelled that good. I told him seasoning was the difference between a forbidden power and a terrible evening. Conrad refused to watch the first bite and then asked, without looking at me, whether the skill appeared immediately. His contempt had become professional interest while his pride was still trying to file an objection. The meal restored my mana and gave me regeneration plus soil and earth removal. Regeneration closed the cuts Riftmaw had left across my back, but the mana cost was heavy enough to make my legs shake. Soil and earth removal had already beaten my spell once, and the route ahead was about to make it useful. We reached the old boss route and found it packed with collapsed stone. Through one narrow crack, white gold light pulsed around something taller than a house, and every pulse came faster than the last. The next chamber held a dragon egg, and for once every elite in the room made the same mistake. They thought an egg would be easier than a dragon. At the blocked boss route, Conrad repeated his retreat proposal while the white gold pulse behind the rubble sped up. Calvin refused because the cycle was still advancing, and leaving now meant giving whatever lived inside the next chamber time to finish. I placed one hand on the collapse. Soil and earth removal answered the same way it had inside Riftmaw. Stones softened into loose earth and flowed around our boots until a passage opened through the center. Conrad had mocked the meal that gave me the skill less than an hour earlier. Now he moved through my doorway without commenting, which counted as growth. The chamber beyond was large enough to swallow the guild hall. At its center sat an egg taller than a house, white shell veined with gold and rooted into the living floor. Calvin recognized the species from old records. White dragons reincarnated through labyrinths, preserving knowledge while the core rebuilt their bodies. A dragon that survived enough cycles earned the Wise Dragon title. Whatever lived inside that shell could remember techniques from lives none of us had seen. A pulse traveled through the roots while he spoke. The shell brightened from the bottom upward, and every beat came faster than the last. Nobody needed a clock to understand that the body inside was almost ready. One impatient adventurer heard, "Hatching dragon," and attacked before Calvin finished. A tentacle burst from the floor, caught him in the middle of his swing, and threw him into the wall. The specialist caught his body in a barrier before the second impact broke his spine, but the egg had already learned that one attacker would rush ahead of the formation. Then the entire chamber grew limbs. The egg had too many opinions and even more tentacles. Have you ever watched an egg learn your fighting style? I had, and I hated how quickly it understood us. Conrad cut one near the root, and Lucian burned the stump. A pale replacement pushed through the ash before the severed piece hit the ground, then split into two thinner limbs and attacked both men. Appraisal returned a concealed level and unreadable abilities, which was a very rude way for the egg to confirm that it had more secrets than we had stamina. Calvin raised his shield, and the next tentacle attacked his feet. Selena froze a root, and another limb shattered the ice from below. When Zephyra tried the ceiling, a white tendril followed her wind instead of her body. The defense was learning from every hit and changing the next answer. We spread out and attacked in rotating groups, with Calvin holding the center. Conrad and Lucian cut opposite sides. Selena's spirits controlled the regrowth, and the mana specialist layered barriers over anyone caught by a limb. The first push removed 6 tentacles. 8 replaced them, and 2 grew armor where Lucian's fire had burned the earlier stumps. The egg healed by revising itself around us. Lucian reached a seam in the shell, but a white ridge closed over his wrist. Selena froze the joint before it crushed him, and Pride Prince thanked her by pretending he had never needed help. Their rivalry became useful teamwork for almost 3 full seconds. I reached the egg under Zephyra's wind and drove Grimfang into the seam. The blade screamed with pleasure because the shell carried more mana than any stone we had fed it. Telekinetic pressure tried to peel my fingers from the hilt, so I anchored thread manipulation around the nearest root and kept cutting until a crack opened wide enough to show red light inside. Selena sent Zephyra through the gap. The shell closed before the spirit reached the center. Zephyra struck from inside and escaped with part of one wing of wind torn away. Selena felt the damage through their contract and nearly lost her footing. She recalled the spirit before the closing shell trapped her completely, then held the wounded wind shape against her shoulder until it stabilized. That near loss ended every plan involving one person slipping inside. The next opening had to fit Calvin and his charged strike at the same time. A deep pulse shook the egg. Gold veins brightened across the shell, and the tentacles moved faster. We hit it again, and Calvin crushed 2 roots while Conrad anchored a third. Selena froze the seam, and I cut it open. The shell healed before Calvin could enter, catching the edge of his shield and throwing him backward. We repeated the attack from another angle. The egg copied the timing, abandoned 2 outer limbs, and wrapped Calvin's shield before his charge was ready. Lucian cut him loose, but a second limb struck Pride Prince across the ribs and the opening vanished. The wounded adventurer from the first attack tried to stand and found one leg numb. The specialist kept him behind her barrier and still had to watch the egg target him whenever our pressure dipped. It remembered the easiest body in the chamber. Every attempt taught the egg more and left us weaker. It only needed to keep regenerating until the body inside finished forming. Calvin saw the same problem and changed the plan. Every tentacle had to fall together. Selena had to open the shell at that exact moment, and Calvin had to strike before regeneration chose a wound. How do you synchronize an expedition when every fighter sees a different opening? You put the former baggage in all their heads. The chamber was too loud for normal timing, and half the group was fighting out of sight. I had the answer because command came from the general lizard that once hid behind a formation and made every soldier move through one voice. I activated the skill, and every willing member of the expedition heard me inside their head. Lucian looked offended that the former party baggage had become his internal narrator. I was enjoying that more than the situation allowed. Through command, I felt who was ready, who was injured, and where hesitation would break the count. I gave the spirits one job each. Terran locked the low roots, Zephyra and Luxon took the high limbs, Cinder burned fresh regrowth, and Maris froze the seam. Conrad anchored the left, Lucian cleared the right, and the specialist kept the wounded alive long enough to hold their places. The channel also exposed every private reaction. Lucian hated receiving orders from the former baggage, Conrad hated agreeing with him, and both men still shifted on my count because the egg was giving their pride no useful job. Selena's readiness came through steady and immediate. She trusted the timing before I finished assigning it. The egg attacked Calvin before the count began. One tentacle dragged his shield offline. Conrad drove his weapon through the limb and used his injured shoulder as an anchor. Another smashed the specialist's first barrier and reached for the wounded adventurer behind her. She stepped through the recoil, took the scrape across her own arm, and raised the second layer around Calvin instead. Lucian took a cut across the back while clearing the high root. Nobody remained clean enough to pretend this was a strategy exercise. The synchronization was working because every person paid for the position. The creature had recognized the charged strike as the real threat, which pulled every defense toward the place we wanted to break. I used thread manipulation to redirect one limb, and Grimfang swallowed the magic inside another. Selena stepped between Calvin and a third until Zephyra hit it from the side. Through command, every movement reached me as pressure and intent. Fear, pain, and pride stayed in the channel, and all of us acted through them on the same beat. I started the count. 3. A shape pushed against the inner shell. 2. The 5 spirits tightened around the seam while Calvin gathered Void Strike behind his shield. 1. I crossed the final stretch with Flash Step and drove Grimfang into the old cut. 0. Every tentacle fell together, the severed roots flooded the floor with white fluid, and regeneration stalled under too many wounds. Selena's spirits hit the seam from 5 angles. The shell split wide enough for Calvin. As it opened, I tore off one loose fragment, bit down, and shoved the rest into my magic bag. Dragon essence burned through my throat and settled beneath my monster mana, but the battle gave me no time to understand it. Calvin entered the shell and released everything he had stored through Void Strike. White shell exploded across the chamber. The roots collapsed, the red light died, and the shape inside stopped moving. For one breath, the expedition believed we had killed it. Conrad dropped to one knee and laughed once because the impossible timing had worked. Selena let her weapon dip, and Zephyra folded into the air beside her. Lucian looked at me with the irritated respect of a man who had just obeyed the former Blight Scavenger inside his own head. Even the wounded adventurer behind the barrier started pushing himself upright. Then an adventurer stepped toward the remains and looked for the magic stone. Every true monster kill left one behind. There was no stone. Calvin's relief vanished. He moved between the remains and the wounded before anyone finished breathing. The specialist raised her barrier again. Selena pulled every spirit close, and Conrad forced himself off one knee as a wet crack came from inside the ruined egg. The remains moved. A malformed dragon dragged itself from the shell on uneven limbs. White scales broke around exposed black tissue. One foreleg was still too short, and telekinesis held the unfinished ribs together. Then it spoke in clear human language. The creature named itself Cauldrus, a wise dragon whose reincarnation we had interrupted before the body completed. Its eyes passed over Calvin, Conrad, Lucian, and Selena before stopping on me. Cauldrus smelled monster essence inside a human body. It called me an impurity, called the expedition thieves, and promised to punish every person who had touched its rebirth. Telekinetic force crushed the cleared passage behind us and sealed the egg chamber. The exhausted expedition raised its weapons again. Cauldrus smiled at the damage we had already taken and asked us to provide better entertainment than the egg had. Cauldrus sealed the egg chamber while shell dust was still falling, so the exhausted expedition attacked before its malformed body could finish straightening. Calvin led with his shield. Conrad and Lucian split the sides. Selena sent Zephyra high while I rushed the damaged leg. Cauldrus read all of it. The wise dragon had carried combat knowledge through multiple lives. It turned around Calvin's charge, caught Conrad's blade with telekinesis, and moved the damaged leg before Grimfang reached the joint. When Lucian changed direction, Cauldrus copied the footwork and placed a tail sweep at the end of his route. Then the same force lifted half the expedition and threw us into the walls. Our opening assault had shown it 6 techniques and landed nothing worth keeping. Caldress stood straighter after the exchange because regeneration was repairing the body while our attacks taught the mind. Caldress waited for us to stand because quick deaths bored the unfinished dragon. It lifted Calvin's dropped shield, copied the angle of his opening rush, and sent the weapon spinning back through the team. The mana specialist raised a barrier in time, but the impact cracked 2 layers and drove her to one knee. Caldress applauded its own imitation. Conrad attacked during the gesture, and the dragon bent his weapon aside without looking. That casual dismissal hurt him more than the blocked strike, which was exactly why Caldress chose it. Trust me, watching a dragon return your best move is insulting right up until it becomes lethal. I used Flash Step toward its blindside. Caldress placed a claw where I would arrive and struck before my foot touched down. Steel Body kept the blow from tearing through me, but the impact folded my breath and threw me across the floor with Grimfang still locked in my hand. Lucian rushed Caldress before it could follow. He used haste to keep the dragon's attention on the opposite side, then abandoned his own clean strike when a telekinetic blade turned toward Selena. Pride. Prince had finally learned that survival mattered more than winning the same moment twice. Selena called all 5 spirits. She had already spent most of her magic on the egg, yet every smaller attack gave Caldress more information. Spirits Quintet was the one force large enough to crush the dragon before it finished learning us. What do you do when the enemy already understands your strongest attack? Selena spent the power anyway, because leaving Caldress time was worse. Zephyra fixed the air while Cinder compressed fire. Maris gathered water, Terran locked the floor, and Luxon shaped the path through the exposed tissue. Caldress watched with bored interest. It had seen the 5 spirits align during the egg battle. Telekinesis pulled Terran off center, shoved Cinder's flame upward, and twisted Luxon's line so the elements would collide early. Selena corrected each distortion with power she didn't have to spare. Blood ran from one nostril before the formation settled. She fired anyway, and Spirits Quintet struck Caldress full in the chest. The chamber flashed white, stone broke under the force, and the dragon disappeared inside 5 combined elements. When the light cleared, Caldress was still standing. Its skin had split, and one exposed rib snapped under the blast, but telekinesis held the frame together while regeneration worked underneath. The dragon had seen the quintet once and separated the converging force before it reached the heart. It even returned a ribbon of stolen wind that cut Selena's sleeve as the spell died. Selena's knees buckled, and Calvin moved to cover her. Caldress hit him with a copied impact pattern and threw him across the chamber. Lucian attacked from the other side and landed beside him. That sequence dragged Selena back into the abyssal labyrinth. One ally fell, then another, while her strongest attack failed and the enemy kept moving. 5 years earlier, Stormcrest had collapsed around her in the same rhythm, and she had survived long enough to hear every person disappear. Her body froze before her mind could pull it back. One hand stayed raised for a spell that had already ended, and her eyes followed Calvin's unmoving body instead of the dragon approaching her. Zephyra called her name. Terran struck the floor beside her boots. Selena still stared at Calvin and Lucian as if the old dead were lying over the present wounded, and Caldress gave her time to feel every second. I checked my monster mana and found almost nothing. The egg assault, command, healing earlier damage, and the shell essence burning under my skin had drained me. Thread manipulation could pull people toward an exit if I had enough power, and an exit still existed. I had neither. Caldress displayed its copied skills, using Zephyra's wind to cut one route and Terran's earth to break another. Lightning crawled along a claw in Lucian's pattern, and a false barrier folded over the specialist's real one just to interfere with her control. Then dark force gathered around the other claw in the exact compression Calvin had used at the entrance. Void Strike. Conrad saw the long charge and believed it created an opening. Caldress knew the Marrowgate Guildmaster would rather attack a visible insult than retreat in front of Dunhaven, so it left one side exposed and waited. Conrad charged. Calvin tried to warn him from the floor, but broken ribs turned the shout into a cough. Lucian saw the trap and moved to intercept, then another copied lightning strike cut him off. The Void Strike vanished before release. The technique was bait designed to pull Conrad close, and a telekinetic spike drove through his body and pinned him above the floor with his weapon still extended toward an opening that had never existed. The specialist threw a barrier under him to stop the wound from widening, but Caldress held him beyond reach. Then the dragon admitted it had charged the attack only to give us hope before taking it away. Maris rushed from Selena's side to shield her. The spirits spread into a wall of water around Selena, the same shape she had used during years when the curse left her too weak to protect herself. Cauldress punched through the water and caught Maris's core in its jaws. Selena finally moved and shouted Maris's name, but the dragon bit down and devoured the spirit's core before Zafira could pull her free. The bond vanished. Cinder's flame collapsed to sparks. Terran cracked the floor without direction, Luxon's light dimmed, and Zafira's wind faltered around the missing place in their formation. Maris had carried Selena through Stormcrest, the curse years Varkos, and every step back toward strength. Cauldress held the silence because cruelty was the only part of its new body working perfectly. It watched Selena reach for a bond that no longer answered and said, despair tasted better when people understood the mistake. Then, it lowered its head and promised to eat her next while the remaining spirits watched. Even Lucian had nothing clever left. The damn dragon was treating grief like a hobby. Cauldress lunged. I reached Selena before the jaws closed. The white dragon shell I had swallowed erupted inside me. Power tore through my arms, legs, and spine. The floor broke under my first step. I crashed into Cauldress hard enough to knock its head away from Selena, dragged the malformed body across the chamber, and drove Grimfang through the broken edge around one eye. The eye burst, and Cauldress finally screamed. Then my body kept moving after I chose to stop. Dragon essence flooded every muscle faster than I could direct it. My hands attacked on their own. Each swing carried enough force to break the floor, and one missed cut split the wall behind Selena. Cauldress recognized the power and laughed through the ruined eye. It had found the impurity it smelled earlier. I had eaten part of its shell and forced wise dragon essence into a human body. The strength drove Cauldress backward, but precision vanished. It turned my momentum aside and sent one uncontrolled strike toward Selena. I twisted enough to miss her, and the correction tore my shoulder. Cauldress stopped retreating and used my own speed against me. Telekinesis caught my sword wrist at the end of a swing, slammed the hand against the floor, and tore Grimfang away. The blade spun across the chamber and landed beside the mana specialist again, exactly where the dragon believed nobody strong enough could reach it. She had watched monster mana move under my skin since the entrance. One look at the overflow told her the problem. The shell essence was flooding every path at once and hijacking movement. The specialist dropped the barrier protecting her own body and ran toward me. That choice exposed Conrad's wound and every support fighter behind her, so Calvin dragged his broken shield into the empty space before she took the second step. Cauldress threw telekinetic blades across her route. Lucian intercepted one despite his broken ribs. Calvin caught the second, and Selena forced Zafira through the last gap with a voice that hadn't recovered from Maris. The wind spirit wrapped the specialist's waist and threw her the final few feet. The woman struck both hands against my back and activated mana harmonization. In one brutal adjustment, she forced the dragon essence into a single route from my core, through my arms. My next movement finally belonged to me. Calvin locked Cauldress's nearest limb even though his shield arm shook. Lucian cut the telekinetic line protecting its chest and took a second blade across the shoulder for staying there. Selena drove Zafira into the ruined eye, and Conrad, still pinned and barely conscious, disrupted the copied earth skill with the tip of his weapon. The specialist kicked Grimfang from the floor into her hand and shoved the hilt toward me. I caught it without breaking stride. Every survivor had created one piece of the opening, and Grimfang had absorbed magic through the entire fight. The hungry sword screamed for the charge. I gave it everything in one step and one swing. Grimfang crossed Cauldress from shoulder to hip. The wise dragon split in half, its telekinesis released at once. Conrad fell into the specialist's remaining barrier. The sealed exit cracked, and both halves of Cauldress hit the floor behind me. The dragon essence finally drained enough for my knees to buckle. Nobody celebrated. Selena crawled to the place where Maris had vanished and held her empty hand against the stone. Zafira hovered beside her without speaking. Calvin checked Conrad. Lucian sat against the wall breathing through broken ribs, and the specialist tried to hold 3 failing barriers at once while the dragon halves leaked white-black blood across the floor. I used regeneration and bloodlust on the damage I could reach, closing the small cuts while the group remained crushed, impaled, and barely able to stand. Substitute could erase conditions, it couldn't replace blood, organs, or shattered bone. Cauldress laughed from the half of its body that still had a mouth. During the labyrinth cycle, the dragon had replaced the destroyed core. Its living mana had been holding the newborn dungeon together. Killing it removed that support. A crack opened beneath the corpse. The floor split across the chamber. Walls folded inward, the ceiling dropped in sections, and the cleared passage began collapsing toward us. Cauldress died smiling because it had turned defeat into a burial timer. I had killed the boss. I could not heal the team, and the labyrinth was coming down around people who could barely stand. Cauldress died, the egg chamber split open, and most of the expedition could barely stand. I reached Selena first and shook her awake. She opened her eyes, saw the ceiling coming down, and ordered me to leave with the people who could still move. Calvin gave the same order from the floor. His reasoning was brutal and correct. Surviving adventurers sometimes abandoned the wounded so part of the team escaped. The mana specialist agreed. Her barriers were failing, the route was narrowing, and staying with bodies she couldn't carry would turn every survivor into another casualty. She shifted Conrad's weight onto 2 mobile adventurers, rebuilt one barrier over the retreat lane, and left because somebody had to guide the wounded through the collapse. Selena tried to push me toward that line. I planted my feet and refused to follow. Selena caught my coat and told me this was the same mistake Stormcrest had made, staying until nobody could save anyone. Her terror came from the thought of watching me disappear into another labyrinth. Calvin tried to stand and collapsed on one knee. He told me courage couldn't change the weight of the wounded or the speed of a falling mountain. Lucian, bleeding against the wall, agreed that one man couldn't carry an expedition and fight the collapse at the same time. Then Grimfang complained about being hungry. I told the metal roommate room service was cancelled. It suggested the wounded. Selena threatened to throw it into the collapse, which proved she still had enough strength for excellent judgment. Lucian raised his head before the argument continued. Pride. Prince had gone quiet and was listening past the falling stone. Claws scraped through the upper passages. Monsters were descending toward us, driven inward by the collapse. We were already screwed, and now the dungeon had made a reservation for the whole horde. That warning ended the debate. If the monsters reached the wounded before the evacuation line moved, nobody would survive long enough to argue about sensible retreat. I looked at the people behind me. For years, the guild had called me the Blight Scavenger. Parties rejected me because I could survive poison and couldn't protect anyone. Oren and his friends stole the harvest room that paid my rent. Crimson Edge recruited me because Gareth believed my life was worth less than his backpack. Then Selena chose me when I still carried a bad sword and a worse reputation. Hank accepted the secret I expected people to hate. Calvin trusted me with Dunhaven. Fletcher killed his closest friend to save the room, and even Lucian had stopped seeing a fraud long enough to bleed beside me. Every person on that floor had paid something to keep the others alive. Walking away from them would have returned me to the porter Crimson Edge chose because nobody expected him to matter. The S-rank hero from my childhood had stayed in a burning street until every survivor escaped. He never waited for the odds to become polite. He made himself the reason everyone else still had time. I had spent years trying to reach his rank. In that corridor, the badge meant nothing. I put Selena's hand against my chest so she could feel I was still there. I won't leave you, I told her, and I won't leave them. Then I drew Grimfang and faced the sound coming through the dust. No one dies here. Selena stopped arguing, and although fear stayed in her eyes, she used the time I gave her instead of wasting it. She tightened the bandage around Calvin's side, called Zephyra to support Conrad's weight, and never once looked away from me longer than the work required. Calvin ordered the mobile adventurers to move the wounded while I held the choke point. Lucian dragged himself beside Selena and took her weight despite his broken ribs. The choice had stopped being mine alone. Everyone behind me was now spending the seconds I promised to buy. The first monsters reached the corridor. Heroism in that passage meant counting how many seconds the wounded still needed. How many could one exhausted body buy? I was about to find out. Hobgoblins came first, followed by gargoyles, parasite-covered beasts, and creatures twisted by the unfinished cycle. One hobgoblin carried a broken gargoyle wing as a shield. Parasites rode larger bodies and jumped whenever a corpse fell. The collapse had forced every surviving predator toward the same exit, and the narrow corridor gave their numbers one direction. I used Roar, and the Minotaur's voice stopped the first rank for one heartbeat. Aerial slash cut through the front, venomous stingers poisoned the regenerative bodies behind them, and thread manipulation pulled falling stone across the wide passage until the horde had to reach me through one narrow lane. The first wave died in the choke point and became a wall the second wave had to climb. I used principles of earth magic to raise the corpses under their feet, then collapsed the ground when the larger monsters committed their weight. Every ugly lesson from every boss came back at once. Every meal I had eaten came back as a weapon. Echolocation mapped bodies through the dust. Thermal search found the hot shapes behind the rubble. Physical boost kept my legs moving. Steel body absorbed claws that still broke skin through impact, and bloodlust returned small pieces of health while the wounds multiplied. Grimfang drank spells from the hobgoblins and grew hot in my hand. I pushed Lightning Cloak through the blade until current wrapped the edge. Wrapped lightning. The first sweep split a gargoyle and jumped into the parasites behind it. Blue light filled the corridor long enough for Calvin to see the exit path, and the retreat line moved another body away from the chamber. A second sweep burned through 3 hobgoblin weapons before they touched me. Grimfang laughed inside my head, and the horde hesitated at the sight of one bleeding man turning stolen monster skills back against all of them. For a few seconds, the choke point belonged to me. Then the numbers arrived as a gargoyle crashed from above and pinned my left arm beneath a slab. The horde kept coming, and pulling free would take too long. Broodclaw had taught me the answer underwater. I activated autotomy and severed the trapped arm. Pain hit clean and white. Blood covered Grimfang's guard, my balance vanished, and the monsters surged because they recognized weakness. I used Roar with half a breath to stop the nearest claws, stepped away before my body understood what was missing, then triggered regeneration, the skill Riftmaw had given me. Bone, muscle, and skin rebuilt from the shoulder down. The new hand shook once and closed around the sword. Regrowing the arm consumed nearly all the monster mana I had left. Selena saw it happen from halfway down the corridor. Her face broke, but she kept moving because stopping would waste the price I had paid. I caught Grimfang in the new hand and forced Wrapped Lightning through it again. The blade cut a gargoyle, burned 2 parasites, and held the lane while the wounded gained more distance. Another wave came, then another. The retreat line disappeared around the next turn, one wounded body at a time. Selena was the last face I could still see, and she kept moving backward only because stopping would send the others back for her. My monster mana emptied as Wrapped Lightning flickered, regeneration slowed, and Grimfang shrank with its stored magic. A giant body struck from the side. I cut it, but smaller monsters climbed over the corpse. One opened my back, another caught my leg, and twice as many shapes waited behind the fog. Willpower kept my legs under me until the next charge broke my guard. Grimfang left my hand when a claw hit my chest and threw me backward through the collapsing passage. For one weightless second, I saw Selena reaching toward me, Calvin trying to rise, and Lucian turning despite the pain because they all believed the horde had finally taken me. Then someone caught me. One arm stopped my fall as if the force meant nothing. The stranger planted one foot in the broken corridor, caught my full weight, and held me above the horde without losing balance. I didn't recognize his face in that instant. Years had passed, smoke had blurred half the childhood memory, and my vision was failing. In hindsight, I know who followed the regional emergency signal into Cedar Ridge. Ronan Keel was the S-rank hero who carried me from my burning village. Every monster I ate had brought me to the moment he took the weight from me. "You've done enough, leave the rest to me."